The September 8th regular meeting of the Fairfield Board of Education is called to order. Present, we have Ms. Rotelli, Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Gerber, myself, Mrs. Vitale, Superintendent Cummings, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, Mr. Peterson, and Ms. Leeper. Ask you all to please rise for the pledge and please remain standing afterwards. That was for Mr. Cummings, for you, for central office staff, for all the teachers, for all the custodians, for the nurses, for the teachers, for the paraprofessionals, for the sped ed trainers, for the crossing guards, for the secretaries, for everyone who lent a hand to all the work in all the months that led up to today. I'm sure there was the good, the bad, the ugly, which we'll hear about later in the meeting, but I know a lot of hard work went into this day from everybody, and just want to thank you to start off for that. To the public, we are here. We're looking a little bit differently, but we are happy to be before you. And if you are having trouble viewing us on cable, you turn into the FairTV website because we were having some problems with the cable here. We're going to start with public comment, which unfortunately due to the executive orders, the public is not able to join us live yet in our meetings. There is a public comment form that is posted with the agenda on the Fairfield Public Schools website, and you can also email us public comment. We are going to move on to a presentation. 2019-2020 high school athletics financial presentation. We're joined by our athletic directors for the two high schools, Mr. Parness and Mr. Fry. The presentation, we're not going to be able to put it on the screen just because of some technical difficulties with that today. For the public, it is posted with the meeting agenda, so if you want to follow along, please go to the website. For the board, the presentation is at your seat. What? Okay, Mr. Cummings, I don't know if you want to give anything, or if we should, like an intro to this, or if we should just go right to the ADs. No,
Sorry, I forgot. I've been out of practice. I want to thank the athletic directors, Mr. Parness and Mr. Fry, for all the work they did on this summer. Also, the support they got from Ms. Munsell and her staff, as well as Dr. Parrish. This was a report that came out of conversations at the policy committee, as well as the finance committee. I think that as the report is given, the points that the athletic directors are going to stress are really the same points that we in the administration want to stress. We set this up deliberately, almost as a prequel to budget discussions, which will follow in the fall. So, gentlemen.
Good evening. Thank you. We want to thank you for the opportunity to present here tonight. We have this presentation is rich with information, but Todd has told me that I need to be much more brief than I have been in the past. So I'm going to do my best. Just to begin, you see the athletic mission statement. We start every meeting, our coaches meetings, our parent meetings with that, just to kind of remind and refocus everyone on what we're all about and what our athletic program is intended for. We believe that education-based athletics has tremendous value, and we think it's important to always start with that. So we thought it was also appropriate in this situation. Tying into that, and one of the slides at the end that talks a little bit about participation and accomplishments, points out the fact that we have, and this is from the 2018-2019 school year. That was a complete school year with 3 full seasons. Obviously, last year wasn't, so we thought the most thorough report would be from this year. And during that year, we had, between the two high schools, almost 1,700 unique student athletes playing sports. and, including some of them that played multiple sports. So we had over 2,400 students on rosters that year, which we're tremendously proud of, that we can serve so many of the students in Fairfield with an athletic program. The other thing we want to just point out is that, as mentioned, it's the 2018-2019 report, and it's really just a snapshot of 1 year of, you'll see a lot of the financials and then, again, the accomplishments and some of the details about how the finances are arranged here. But when looking at those individual sports, we just have to keep in mind this is a snapshot. There are reasons, and we can, explain in detail every reason why some things may look, not, where one school has spent, significantly more than the other school. And again, that's just a snapshot of 1 year, and there are reasons for that. As mentioned, we have, a very extensive athletic program at each high school, comprised of 37 sports. We take, great care to ensure that there's equity among the programs at both schools. Currently, there is no paid participation fee for any of our sports. And as I mentioned, this is the 18-19 school year. So just to summarize the finances, there are really 4 accounts that contribute to the athletic programs at the schools. We each have a school-based athletic account. We each have a school-based rental account. The district has an account from central office that pays for certain things. And then we have school-based ticket revenue, which we can explain a little bit more. The following pages explain what is paid for from each account. Okay, so, it'll say the school-based athletic account, what it pays for. And then the next page is how much it was that year for each high school. The important thing we want to point out on this page, is where I'm on page 6, is that in each of the school-based accounts, again, this is a snapshot of 1 year, but this is fairly typical, or very typical, actually. It shows what we were allocated at the beginning of each year. This particular year, there was a freeze or a reduction. And then it shows in the end what we ultimately spent, which in some cases includes transfers in within the school to cover overages. And what we want to point out here is when we say non-negotiables, and we have that at the bottom, which includes fees, game workers, medical supplies, reconditioning, and transportation, we're really talking about 80 to 84%, or 84% for Ludlow and 80 for Ward in this year, of our funds that are already basically accounted for at the beginning of the year. When we put in things like tennis balls, football, soccer balls, which are also essential, that number is really close to like 95, 96%, which doesn't leave room for much else, which we'll explain how that ties in at the end as well. Our rental account pays for the facilities there listed on page 7. And if you look at page 8, this is a good example of one of the major differences you'll see at Ward and Ludlow. And really the reason for that is that each school, for our co-op teams, where we have students from both high schools competing on the same team, fencing, sailing, bowling, skiing, boys ice hockey, girls ice hockey, each school is assigned as the host school just for organizational purposes. So when we split high schools back in 2005, really for no other reason other than that some of the coaches were at Ward for those more expensive co-ops, Ward became the host school. So, we pay for the rental for boys ice hockey and for the ski team, and that's really the big difference there as to why there's so much more allocated for Ward. Moving on, you see what's paid from the district accounts. On page 10, that's basically the coaches for both schools, which is essentially the same. It's about the same spent each season. We talk a little bit about the ticket revenue. Some of these things may seem obvious, but the revenue certainly varies year to year, depending on a whole host of things. And then on page 11, it shows the summary, which again is fairly typical with our current practices. And you can see that both high schools generate about the same amount of revenue and spend about the same. And a big reason for that is that we share the revenue on all the Ward Ludlow contests, and we share the expenses as well. And that's where most of the ticket revenue is from. We have the details of that, on page 14. And then just a little bit, briefly on the gate receipts history. You see there was a significant increase from the 2016-17 year to the 2017-18. And then this year it was 48,000, so another small increase. We changed our practice at that time and started charging admission for all sports that required extra supervision, in some cases, police coverage. In the past, we had only charged for football and boys basketball and actually girls basketball. But we changed to only those sports where we had extra supervision required, which were really mostly the Ward Ludlow contests because they're so well attended. So we had a significant increase there. We also changed our practice to align with most of the schools in our league and started charging our students $3 to come to the games. So that's part of the reason for the increase there. So the following several pages outline in detail what was spent during this year at each school. That's all information there for you. There's a couple things that we wanted to talk about, some of those differences I mentioned at the beginning, just to explain those things. So I'm going to let Todd do that.
So Seth mentioned before that the major differences among the schools are basically with the co-op expenses. We also share some costs as far as coaches go, even when the sport is not necessarily a co-op. More specifically, it's mostly for girls swim and dive and boys swim and dive. We have one diving coach for both teams, just due to numbers. And those expenses are paid out of the ward budget. So if you're looking through this report very specifically, you'll see that the per pupil expenditure for girls swimming, for example, is a lot higher for Ward than it is for Ludlow. And you could see that on page 18. And that's simply due to the fact that Ward pays for the coach. You'll see that same situation for girls golf. We have one JV coach that coaches both JV teams, and that coach is also paid from the Ward budget. So that's reflected in the per pupil expenditure reports. Other than that, the major differences among the sports in this particular year, or really in any year, are from large purchases. So again, this is a snapshot of one particular year. So I may have bought uniforms for one team, and Seth didn't buy them for Ward for that year. So the per pupil expenditure might be higher for that specific sport, but then for another sport, he may have purchased uniforms. Other than that, the costs are overall fairly equal when looking at the line-by-line budget. The last thing on here is the waterfall. And there really is no waterfall. That's on page 30. And we were asked if there's a waterfall, like, for example, do we buy uniforms every X amount of years? And like Seth mentioned, 84% for Ludlow, 80% for Ward this year was pretty much non-negotiable items that we had to purchase. If you add in some of the other supplies that he mentioned, like balls, for example, we're up over 90%. So in order to have a waterfall for uniforms every X amount of years, just really isn't possible at this time. We wouldn't have enough money to promise uniforms on that consistent basis. As of now, we buy uniforms and other large purchases too, like pole vault pits, wrestling mats, high jump mats, cheerleading mats. Some of those large purchases, we buy them when needed when the funds are available. This past year, with the pandemic, we didn't have a spring season. So we were able to purchase some of those items with money that it would have otherwise went to transportation and officials for the spring and some equipment for those sports. We can't count on a pandemic every 10 years to buy those items, but we clearly need to buy them. And a lot of them are for safety concerns. The mats just don't last forever. We have to purchase them. So those things, we have some recommendations at the end. If you go to the last page, page 32, where it says next steps for improvement, some of those suggestions talk about the budget, different accounts being used for different things, basically ways to make the purchases equal and make it more representative of what's happening. And, if there's any questions based on some of these line items, we'd be happy to answer them individually. Obviously, there's a lot to go through here. There's a lot of line items. There's a lot of expenditures. And we tried to organize it as best as we could to make it easy for you to see the entire picture. And we'd be happy, at this time or any time, if you need more time to look at it, to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you for that presentation. For the board, these gentlemen presented to the Finance Committee last week, so it was a very comprehensive presentation, so I thank you for that. And we just gave them some direction. Our conversation there took over an hour, and just due to our full agenda tonight, just asked them to shorten the presentation, share this information with the board, and for the board to follow up with any specific questions, but we will take questions now, but really just looking more at the big picture. Mr. Asa.
Thank you. Like Mrs. Vitale said, I did sit through the very comprehensive and very well-prepared presentation in Finance Committee. But one thing I just wanted to point out on their page 31 here, I think it's important to note where the numbers talk about total athletes and unique athletes. So unique athletes, if you look at that, it illustrates that more than 50% of our students at each school are participating in one of these sports. And to me, that really stands out as something that we need to consistently and systematically and efficiently plan for and support. This is part of our Fairfield Public Schools life. It's part of our pride. And I think it just really needs to be noted. And those numbers just really stood out to me, that how involved our students are with sports and that we do need to take this seriously. And I support the idea of a waterfall type schedule, so we don't have kids playing with duct tape numbers on the back of their jerseys. I mean, quite honestly, that is embarrassing. And we need to do better by our students, and I appreciate you putting all the work into this because it will let the board have a greater understanding of how we can move forward in budget season and properly plan for these things. So thank you.
Max Kennelly.
Thank you. First, I'm just curious to the Finance Committee. I don't know, Mrs. Leeper, if you want to speak for the committee or the other two members, but I was wondering if you could capture some of the discussion in the Finance Committee before I ask my questions, because it could be that there was overlap, and sorry to spring that on you.
One of the things I think we wanted to get a better understanding of was a lot of the questions that come up during budget season are often the discrepancies between the two high schools. And both athletic directors did a great job of walking us through the minutia of exactly why each expenditure was different for each sport in this 18-19 year. And it did really give us a vivid understanding of why it's important to understand this was a one-year snapshot, because you don't buy necessarily new field hockey uniforms every year. But maybe you do need to buy volleyball spandex every year. These types of nuances that, unless you are really in the weeds, we don't always know. But also to understand how much of the operating budget is already sort of encumbered every year, and how little flexibility they have within their operating budget for the big ticket expenses, and what it could look like and how they could partner with Mr. Papageorge to create a waterfall for those big ticket expenses like new tennis courts, redoing a track, turfs, dugouts, whatever it might be. So I think it was helpful to understand that big picture. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Because I did want to give just a minute of background of what started this all, and that was as a policy committee, we had been asked by central office, and I believe at this point, this is now about 4 years ago, to start looking at a booster club policy. And that is, we were looking at how the family members supporting student athletes in individual sports were being asked for funds, and how that was all being documented and kept track of, and the disparity. And while we were mulling over trying to make a policy for that, what we kept coming back to was the whole notion of, well, before we're talking about that type of money, where's the accountability and the documenting of the expenses within the school? In other words, how well are we supporting our athletes before we started taking a look at the next step of how our families being asked to additionally support? Thank you for the highlight that there's still no fee for participating in sports. Long may that continue. But this whole idea of that accountability, and is there equity, across sports, in terms of all of our Title IX concerns, et cetera. And so in having that discussion in policy, it then segued to the need, because this is, to Mr. Ace's point, this is something that is of tremendous interest in the community in terms of our program. We want to support it. We want to hold up ourselves well compared to other communities. And so thus we requested, and thank you so much for all of this work. I hope it was helpful for you as well to kind of to get this, because I think this lays the groundwork for our making a more powerful argument in the future for what we need. And that just like when we say how much of our overall budget is those, non-touchable items, athletics doesn't have a lot of room, obviously wiggle room as well. That said, I will certainly say that the thing I wanted almost more than anything out of this report was the waterfall. So I will say that, and totally get that, it didn't lend itself to that yet because we're not ready for that level of commitment. I would very much hope for next year that we move towards that. We all know that with our facility waterfall, it's changing all the time. Things have to get moved. But if we don't start making a commitment and have that transparent, we also wanted the transparency to the public that this affords, that other town bodies and interested parents, when parents come to school officials and say, why isn't my team getting a new uniform? There should be a better answer for that, and one that we can stand behind and say we are committed to that, and that no one sport should be embarrassed while another sport is being better supported. So that's kind of the genesis of all of this. All of that said, I did on page 11, where you talk about the excess funds are used for athletic department needs, I was wondering if you could give examples of what that might be and how they're accounted for.
Sure, thank you. So far, really until just a few years ago, there were no excess funds. So in the past, and I think I pointed out, those years going back, 4 or 5 years, the ticket revenue didn't cover the expenses at all. So then we would need to kick in, each school would need to kick in the difference to cover that shortage. So I asked if we change our policies and there's an excess, will we be able to use those funds? And they laughed at me because it had never happened. But we did change the policy and we did have excess funds. So I know we've bought, for our varsity boys and girls soccer teams, we bought uniforms for. We bought, at Ward, we bought white jerseys for football, not a full set of uniforms, we bought the white jerseys. We bought sideline capes for when it's pouring rain, and we still play because we have a turf field. And I think that's what we've gotten so far at Ward with those excess funds the last couple of years.
Ours has been the same practice. So before we spend any extra money, all of this goes to the expenses for the games. So all the gate receipts go to the game workers, the officials for the games, the clock operators, the billing for the police, ambulance, sometimes if there's a fire watch, all of those expenses get paid first. And then if there's any excess, like Seth was saying, we are able to spend that. And it has gone to uniforms the past year. Before that, there was no extra funds. So now we're using it for uniforms. I think that year we got football uniforms. We couple years ago, we had about 40 football players. Now we're up to 120. So we simply did not have enough uniforms for the entire team, and we had to buy new ones to equip everybody. So that year, that's what we bought with the excess.
Yeah, and just to go back to some of the points that were made about our expenses at each school, and where, for the most part, the per pupil expenditure, for each sport at each school is pretty similar. It's important just to keep in mind, what we pay the officials is negotiated. What we pay the coaches is in the FEA contract, so there aren't going to be big differences in that. There are small differences sometimes in travel. Success of a team, they may go deep in a state tournament, they may spend a little bit more on travel, but even that is sometimes misleading. If you have a really good team, you earn home state tournament games, or you may just travel to Westport and play Staples, and you never really can predict that exactly. But for the most part, most of our expenses are the same. It's just those individual things that, I know in this particular year I bought field hockey uniforms, but year to year, we spend about the same amount on field hockey. It just looks like this year I spent a great deal more. The other thing I wanted to mention, I forgot.
Just a couple more questions, and just to clarify, when Fairfield is host, either school, to the FCACs or any of those other playoffs, how much of that is owed to the league, and how much does the school or schools retain?
So when all the schools in the FCAC, or almost all of them that are able to host, tournament games and things like that, if they have a big enough facility, they're doing just that. Like as part of the league, we're hosting, so it's not going to cost us anything at the school level. For example, we have a terrific gym, large gym, so we host the boys basketball quarterfinals every year. We used to host the whole thing, the semis and the finals. So there's custodial overtime that day, but the FCAC pays that. The workers that day, the police that day, the FCAC pays that. Now, they get the ticket revenue also. So, it's just a matter of, they use our facility, and just like we use the turf field at Ludlow for a lot of the FCAC tournaments as well.
Okay, and then my last question was on the last page, is that I was hoping you actually could explain these next steps for improvement. I know I've articulated a wish for the waterfall, both facility and especially uniform. But the items at the bottom, in terms of steps to improve, the three at the bottom, I'm unclear what they are.
So you're on page 32?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And we are going to start to work on that waterfall now that we're hopeful that's going to be a possibility, and we have a little bit better idea as to the lifespan of some of these things. Many things were purchased when we went to two high schools just because we needed to, and Ward was using a lot of the leftover Fairfield high school stuff for a long time. But now, because of what happened last year, we were able to purchase some things, so we're both kind of at a pretty good starting point moving forward. So we're gonna work on that waterfall. As far as page 32, the bullet that says extend spending deadlines. Typically, as the spring approaches, we're trying to get, the entire school district, trying to get all of the finances in order to close out the school year. So we're often asked to, finish our spending sometimes in April, and the spring season for sports is just starting in April. So we don't know at that point how successful our teams are going to be, how far they're going to go in the state tournament, if they might need extra, or how much money they will use for officials and transportations as they end their seasons. And it's really day to day. I mentioned before, we might be a certain place ranking in the class LL for a certain sport, and one game difference, instead of going to Staples for a very inexpensive bus, we might be going to Norwich Free Academy for a bus that's 4 or 5 times that amount. So that's just something that it's really hard to predict. So if we could extend the spending deadlines, at least for the athletic programs, we would think that could be very helpful. Utilizing arbiter pay for game workers. Currently, we have all of our game workers, officials, and then, as Todd mentioned, the clock operator, the ticket taker, the announcer, et cetera. They have to fill out a voucher, and we have to sign it, send it downtown. They process it, mail them a check. Arbiter pay has been adopted by a lot of the schools in our league, and it's a way to electronically pay all of those people and eliminate the work that is done at central office, eliminate the physical check, eliminate the postage. Of course, there is a fee with it, but it'll also be helpful when we go to put together reports like this in terms of organizing and finding what was done. And really, now that so many other schools are doing it, we're almost, we get, pressure from some of the officials sometimes. "Oh, just pay me on Arbiter," and we don't have that, because they get paid, pretty much right away, because it's all done electronically. So we'd like to move to that just to make things easier. We use a lot of facilities. We count on our coaches to, have the officials fill out the voucher. Sometimes the official shows up late, just jumps out there, gets the game going. At the end of the game, it's forgotten or it's misplaced, and then we're tracking it down 2 or 3 months later, and it's just not a good use of our resources. We have a terrific secretary that's great with it, but there's a lot more important things he could be doing. So we'd really like to move towards that. And again, as so many other schools have, we feel like, it's definitely time for us to do that, and it could be a big help. And then, as mentioned there, 12-month secretarial support. Sean Saylor is terrific. Each school, when we split schools, had a 10.5-month secretary, and at some point that was cut to one 10.5-month secretary split between the two schools. Sean is fantastic. Sean helped us on this report in the summer when he didn't have to. We would buy him lunch as much as we could and do other things, and we really appreciate him, and we love him, and he knows that. But it really would make sense for him to be a 12-month staff member, particularly because there's on normal years, sports start before school starts. So coaches have to get certified, paperwork has to be done with human resources and thing, and Sean coordinates lots of that. And those things really need to be done in the summer. So to have him start a few days before school is just, it makes it, more challenging. And it would be very helpful if we could at least get him moved from 10.5 months to 12 month. We realize there's a cost associated with that, but we think it would be well worth it.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Jacobson?
Hi, Jen Jacobson. Thank you both and Sean for putting this together for all of us. And I echo Ms. Maxon-Kennelly's statements before where this came from and the iteration from it in the hopes that it is only good things for our district to come around this area, because I think it just really puts to paper for everyone what we all could see was a need for a while. My question really is for you is that I don't know if this is to Mr. Cummings or to you all, is it the hope that we would have a draft of this waterfall for the upcoming budget season, at least on a 1-year basis? And I'm sure we're not looking at a 10-year waterfall like we have for facilities right now, but at least some sort of a framework for the 21-22 school year?
Yes, I think we need to begin that this year in the next budget cycle.
And so just so I'm clear, right now, when you go and meet as a department head in terms of the budget, you're not including in your current budget these things like uniforms and equipment. That's just not a part of your budget planning at this point?
It is included, and that is in the line items of the budget. However, sometimes there isn't enough money left over at the end of the year to actually purchase them. So we do our best, but like Seth was saying, sometimes there's unexpected expenses that come up, like a longer bus or equipment breaks that we need to get. And this goes to the point that he was making of extending the spending deadlines, because usually we purchase those things at the end of the year after we know our set purchases are done, after we know the deadline for transportation, for the officials, the game workers, all of that's been completed. Then we'll take what's left and buy the uniforms or the other equipment that we were hoping to purchase that year that was set in the budget.
Okay, so that's good to know. So for coaches, when they, can you guys hear me? When they put in like a request, so to speak, are you asking them to do that almost like a year in advance, so that in the hopes at the end of the year, they might be able to get those items if there's any money left for the following year?
Yeah, there are certain things that, we do buy every year. Like we buy, mentioned before, like the spandex for volleyball, the gymnastics, leotards, swimsuits. And then, we're pretty well aware of what many of the needs are for uniforms. But when we meet with coaches at the end of the season, they talk about, among other things, what equipment and/or uniforms, they would hope for the future. And, when we do buy uniforms, I think I mentioned before, we typically only buy for the varsity, and then the old varsity uniforms get kicked down to junior varsity. The junior varsity get kicked down to freshmen when we have freshman teams. But occasionally, after a certain amount of years of this happening, and our freshmen not filling out those uniforms as well, occasionally we do have to buy something for those sub-varsity teams as well, just because, wear and tear, they're not going to last forever. And, they've already been worn and washed and so forth by the time the freshmen get them. So when those things happen, we do our best to, buy things that aren't too expensive and too elaborate, but it's a challenge sometimes.
And just one last question. For this year, as we get started, is everything good? Operating well, safe, in good condition? Nets are whole and everything's good to go?
This year, we were able to purchase a lot of things that we hadn't been able to because of the pandemic. So a lot of those things have been purchased, but unfortunately, a lot of those things aren't here yet because most things have been on back order, even the ones that we ordered months ago. There's been a lot of shipping delays, so a lot of uniforms and equipment have been purchased, and some that is just trickling in now, and some are still far out that we're still waiting for.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing what comes of this. Thank you.
And just for the board's reference, we did talk with Mr. Parness and Mr. Fry about just working on this waterfall and having them come back to the Finance Committee, not only for the big facilities projects, but really just the equipment and putting it on paper so the board knows and the community knows that, in 2 years, we're going to need to buy wrestling mats. In 3 years, we're going to need to refurbish all uniforms. So we'll probably, I foresee us starting there. I think that might be a little bit easier for them to do that work. And being that health and safety is surrounding those items, that is where at least the Finance Committee thought that would be the starting point that we could do in preparation for this year's budget. And the bigger, waterfall in terms of facilities would work into the work that Mr. Papageorge will be doing for our long-range facilities plan. Any last questions? Thank you, gentlemen, for all you do and for putting this together for us, and we look forward to working with you in the upcoming months. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks.
Okay, we're moving on to the 2020-2021 enrollment update, actual versus projections. Dr. Parrish?
Good evening, board members. Hopefully everyone is able to see the report. It's enclosure number 2. We did modify the report a bit as a result of some collapsing of sections that we needed to do in order to accommodate for the number of students whose parents were opting into the remote-only program. So as a result of the analysis of those numbers, both those that are in the in-person hybrid, you can see in the table, as well as those that are in the remote, there was a reduction at Burr of 2 in-person sections in grades kindergarten and 3. There was no change in the number of in-person sections at Dwight. Holland Hill, a reduction of 4 in-person sections in grades K1, 2, and 3. Jennings, reduction of 2 in-person sections in grades 1 and 5. McKinley had the greatest number of remote learning academy requests, and so there was a reduction of 5 in-person sections in grades 1 through 5, 1 each. There was no change in the number of in-person sections for Mill Hill and North Stratford. Osborne Hill had a reduction of 1 section in grade 1. Riverfield, 1 reduction in grade kindergarten. Sherman, a reduction of 2 in-person sections in grades kindergarten and 1st grade. And then Stratfield, a reduction of 2 in-person sections in grade K and 3. So overall, there was a reduction of 19 in-person sections from 199 to 180. At the time of this report, which was September 2nd, There were 518 students in grades K through 5 who had opted into the Remote Learning Academy. So as a result of those numbers and the limitations that we have in terms of set class sizes, we have 4 sections of grades K2, 3, and 5, and this is on the final page of the enclosure at the very bottom. There are 5 sections of grades 1 and 4 for a total of 26 sections. So as you can see on that last page, the distribution in terms of the different class sizes amongst all of the different sections in each grade. So as a result of that, those additional 26 sections that we needed in the Remote Academy, and I will mention that the Remote Academy classes, in some cases, McKinley was an exception because there were some instances where we had enough students to keep them all in one remote class because of the number. But we did consolidate the remote learning sections across 3 schools. I think 3 was the max number of schools that were collapsed. The majority of the staff, in order to accommodate those 26 sections, came from the reductions that were done within the actual building. So there were 18 staff members that were reassigned from building in-person assignments to assignments within the Remote Learning Academy, and 5 of the STEAM teachers were assigned to the Remote Learning Academy. So this only resulted in us needing to have 3 new hires in order to cover all of the sections of the Remote Learning Academy. So that is the conclusion of the report. I'll answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Dr. Parrish? Ms. Maxicannelli?
Yes, thank you. A couple of questions. I was wondering if you could explain why, because there is some inconsistency in terms of, I think there was a Burr kindergarten and a Stratfield 4th grade, where they got reduced a section and the numbers warranted it, but then there's a grade in Dwight, Mill Hill, North Stratfield had 2 grades, Osborne Hill and Riverfield, where the number of students after the commitment to remote warranted 1 fewer section than what we budgeted, or than what was allocated. And I was wondering if you could explain that discrepancy.
At Dwight, the numbers that are actually the net students in hybrid is what we use to determine the number of sections. So the number of sections at Dwight in K through 4 are all 2, except for grade 5, in which there were 3. And the reason it was left at 3 were some of those grades where it was at the cusp of needing a 3rd section, where it was really close. And if we did have some requests to move back and forth between remote and hybrid, we did need to still allow adequate space within that section. So if it was close in that particular case with Dwight, they were not cut a section in grade 5 because of that number.
Okay, but if you look up above at Burr with 46 students, that's the max. That's 2 sections of 23, which is our max, and so it wasn't done there. And that's what I'm unclear on, that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 occasions where they were allowed to keep the larger number of smaller sections, and at least 2 instances where that was not the case. And that's what I'm trying to understand.
I'm going to jump in. I think some of that is related to the fact that when this was done, which is the date of this report is September 2nd. So I believe this report, when the changes were made, was about 10 days earlier. The numbers might have shifted since then. That's my guess at this point. But we did, as Dr. Parrish said, one of the things we were trying to be conscious of was not to reduce enough or to reduce too many that we would be left hanging if students went back.
No, and which definitely makes, if you've got 2 sections of 25, I understand that, but that's not the case here. Again, that example at Dwight, you could have 75 kids in 3 sections. You could have 50. I mean, there's a balance of 4. And again, maybe it's just the changing numbers, and obviously this is as of September 8th, but that's what just I was not clear on.
So I want to go back and check that number of Burr, because maybe it was that K grade actually was at 4 and it was reduced to 3. I would just have to double check the previous report to make sure that indeed, there was indeed a reduction, but the actual number may be off. So I want to double check that as well. But the rationale was exactly what Mr. Cummins said, was leaving that, because they were on the cusp, leaving that extra section open. So I'll go back and check the Burr kindergarten numbers. Because I think that it appears that's the only grade where there would have been a potential
Well, Stratfield fourth grade as well.
Stratfield fourth grade.
Yep. That's it. I believe it was 48. That got reduced to 2 sections. And other instances where it was not as close were not reduced. But
Okay,
I
yes,
should have
I'll go
said, I
back
should
and
have.
check on both of those.
Okay, thank you.
The third grade, I think, right? Third grade?
Third grade, correct.
I was wondering if you, I don't know, Mr. Cummings or Dr. Parrish, if you could speak to, so the empty classrooms that have then been created, is that something which is useful for the district? That's really just wondering, programming-wise, if that gives the building principals some flexibility that is helpful in these hybrid learning models, or are they small enough that those doors are just shuttered?
You mean the classes that are no longer being used?
That's correct.
Okay, no, I'm not actually aware of what. I know for some buildings, they actually, because they had to move things out of the classroom, they've moved things into some of those rooms, but that has not been the case across all of the schools.
I believe in some cases too, and I'm looking at Dr. Zavichantik, I believe some of those cases, the teachers are actually teaching from those rooms in remote, right? They continue to use them.
Oh, great. Okay, and then I was just wondering, in general, how has it worked out with staffing? And Dr. Parrish, I don't know if this is to you or to Ms. Deasy, in terms of, we were told last meeting that we had 196 requests for accommodation, remote possibility, and I was wondering, how has that worked out in terms of, are there staff who are full-time FTEs? Are they all being employed as classroom teachers, or what's happened with that staffing?
We can give a staffing update. I was going to include it in the superintendent's report if you want to hold on that.
That's fine, thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Parrish?
I'm sorry, I had one more question.
sorry.
I apologize, I had it written down.
That's okay.
Thank you for the clarification that that this all involved 3 new hires. In going to the Remote Learning Academy, which I obviously completely endorse, it does actually involve a pickup of 7 more sections. So how did that, budgeting-wise, work out?
It's in the process of being worked on. These are things that we're working on. I mean, I will tell you that this is the classroom teacher need, right? There's also the middle school need, classroom teachers, as well as Mr. McCusey and his staff are working to hire support staff for these academies as well. And I think we have some of that update in Ms. Munsell's report tonight.
And I have a question, just for clarification to what you said before about some of these numbers. You're building these sections, and at the same time, you're having conversations with families that are really going back and forth. So that was factoring into some of this planning, not, a couple students that change their mind could change the landscape of what this class sizes looks for.
Correct.
Okay,
In either direction.
thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pierce. I would just want to follow up on Ms. Vitale's question there, or comment. If you look at the remote sections on the last page, and if you apply, in your own head, the class size limits that we have for K2 and 3-5, you will see that we have some sections in kindergarten, first grade, that the class sizes are, grade 2, they're approaching our limits, the board adopted desired limits on class sizes. And so we're at a point where if we continue to allow students to move in from hybrid into remote, that we have the potentiality of adding additional classes. So this raises a number of questions and concerns. One of them is that what we don't want to do from an educational practice is take the existing classes, now that they've begun to meet with their teachers, and further split them up. That wouldn't be good for teachers or students, families, right? We don't want to do that. But it does raise budgeting concerns, because we are going to need to address our budget responses to staffing in different ways with the adopted budget. And it also raises a concern on the other side that if students leave remote, what begins to happen to the class sizes if students leave hybrid, what happens to the class sizes in hybrid? One of the things we had talked about during the summer was the ability of parents to switch back and forth from hybrid to remote. And I will say, speaking for the staff, we're having real concerns with that now because of what it not only has an impact on staffing and class sizes and the needs of students and our ability to support, because even if money were the proverbial unlimited, the ability to hire qualified staff at some point is going to become more and more difficult. The other issue we're facing is that as a district, we're looking to see if when things in the next week, essentially, not this week, but next, we're going to be able to consider some possibility of looking back at going into all students in full-time. That starts to become possible, or at least on the cusp of possibility, when you look at the hybrid section numbers. I mean, I will tell you, I have real concerns about this, but it becomes, if we continue to allow the transfer back and forth, the possible solution of going back full-time becomes essentially back and forth, depending on the number of students who select in person. So I raise these issues because we're going to, we had talked with parents about the idea of reopening this window this week. But as we looked at this at the end of last week, and we've really struggled with the staffing issues, which Ms. Deasy will talk about in a little bit, I'm really concerned about our ability to fulfill that. I'm really concerned about our ability to allow, from a logistical point of view, but quite honestly as well, and I don't want to lose sight of this, what's right for kids and staff in having to continually switch back and forth. So I raise this tonight as a real issue and something we're going to work on over the next couple of days.
Mrs. McAnally?
Just for clarification, what is the state requirement in terms of the degree of flexibility that the district provides?
There really isn't any. A lot of districts had a semester or quarterly windows. Our concern with that when we were planning this summer was it didn't seem mindful enough of the changes that families might have to go through. But now we're seeing the value in that because of just, again, this kind of migration back and forth. And I will tell you, I get a lot of emails and I've had phone calls with parents, and they're really, as you know, they're struggling with a number of issues around this, right? A lot of it is health-related issues within the family. A lot of it is employment issues. There's real concern about the ability and kind of the worry about the virus itself. How long are we going to be able to be in this? So I think that's having a lot of influence on people's selections. I have a curiosity if today and the days that follow, our ability to deliver the strong hybrid program that we started to see today will perhaps bring people back. We already know, Ms. Munsell, I think we'll talk about the fact that one day in, we have a tremendous increase in people who are looking to ride the bus again. So, will that bring people back into the hybrid? And now what happens to these classes? These are just things that we want to be able to sustain, and from a financial point of view, but also from a what's right for kids point of view.
Ms. Jacobson?
Just to that point, Mr. Cummings, on the remote RLA sections, is there just a reason, or maybe Dr. Parrish might want to answer this question, why some of them are so different in size? So, for example, like fourth grade, one is 14, one is 23. Is there any reason why there seems to be such a spread across them?
So the spread was based on the clustering of schools. So to keep certain schools together throughout certain grade levels, that determined what the clustering was.
So that's pretty much a party to theater patterns, so to speak? Or just the groupings that you randomly selected?
The groupings that were used to put the actual remote clusters together. Or
Okay.
the remote sections together.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Asa?
So just to clarify, Mr. Cummings, so the public knows, in the next few days, you'll be making a determination as to the flexibility of the district and parents on going in and out. So there is a possibility that we're going to change that 10-day window to a longer period of time, is what I understand. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
But will there still be a window for parents to, before we make that change, to change back before the final decision is made?
That's something we have to consider, because if you look at that, like, for example, that kindergarten number, I am worried that we have 1, 2, 6, 8 possible openings there before we'd have to add another section. So I am concerned that if we open the window back again, we're going to have to hire another teacher there. And I will tell you, I think that the talent, I'm not disparaging anybody who's applied for a position in the district, but it's just one of the concerns that is kind of influencing our decision-making.
I do think it's important to note, just for when we put the 10-day window out, the model has changed significantly. At that point, we were looking at full instruction and remote. The staffing associated with the hybrid model adds new challenges, and at that point, we didn't necessarily know who was opting for full remote and, staffing who were asking for accommodations.
We did, as the board knows, and the conversations have, and I acknowledge for parents and our staff some of the difficulty in getting the remote learning academy going, because it's literally the last thing we worked on this summer. But part of that is based on the fact that we tried to create a model that was highly supportive of students, that they were not at that age remoting in for live instruction in their classrooms. That would have been a less expensive model, but I think we all struggle with it from an educational point of view. I think, Dr. Parrish, you said that there's around over 500 students in the Remote Learning Academy. It is, by 100 students, our largest elementary school right now. So that's just something that we have to keep in mind.
Ms. Pitko?
This might seem a little trivial, but it's important in this scenario as I'm playing in my head. Are you talking about 10 consecutive days or 10 school days? Because if you change the number, it'd be very important to distinguish that. I just think of if a child gets sick, or if a scenario at home changes and the child needs to come back to school, parents' planning would need to be sure and accurate about when their child could return.
Well, honestly, we've had a pretty loose 10-day policy so far this summer. And you raise an important point, though, I want to address. If a student becomes ill, if a student is not ill but is forced to quarantine, that student remains, if the student started in hybrid, that student remains in hybrid and is supported by the classroom teacher, because, again, we were looking to minimize transitions for the students.
Any other questions, Ms. Pitko? Ms. Jacobson?
And just following up on this, is it similar at the middle or at the secondary level in high school? And I know we don't have the same strict class size guidelines at those levels, so it might not be as challenging, but still concerning regarding potential class sizes there as well, or are we not seeing as much there?
I'm going to ask Dr. Parrish to comment on middle school class sizes. She's more familiar with those than I am right now.
So the middle school remote academy was based around the level of math that the students needed. So that is what determined a lot of the number of sections and the number of students in those sections. So the class size varies based on the number of students that require a specific level of math. Within the middle school, I think on 6th grade, our numbers was about 71, and it was roughly 90 in 7th and 8th grade each, the number of students that actually needed, that were a part of the Remote Learning Academy.
Ms. Leeper?
To Mr. Cummings, I know you mentioned you were going to talk about staff during the superintendent update, so if this is better suited for that time, just say so. But were any expectations around moving between Remote Learning Academy and hybrid communicated to staff? I'm just thinking of the 3 FTE we had to hire because of the collapsing of sections. Were those 3 teachers told, like, if we need to open up more sections for hybrid, you guys are first? Is there any sort of expectations like that communicated to staff that they might need an additional level of flexibility?
You mean in terms of moving from being a remote teacher to being a hybrid teacher?
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly if that was an expectation that was communicated to the teachers, because our thought was that once we create the remote academy, based on the need, that they would continue with those teachers moving forward. So it's not that those remote teachers will now become hybrid.
I'm just thinking if we're worried about a lot of kids a lot of families assessing, actually, it does seem safe. We are wanting our kid to return back to school, and now we don't have the staff or sections for all those kids to return to school, and especially in elementary grades, to maintain the class size guidelines. Like you said, finding those staff could be hard. And I understand that it could work out that we don't take all the same Remote Learning Academy teachers' kids. They might not all come from Riverfield and Sherman, for example. But if there was an opportunity for that, or has any staff been notified that if we need to move staff between the 2 options, either you could volunteer or we might need you to do that?
No, that was not.
Can I ask one more question? The staff that is teaching in the Remote Learning Academy, have they all requested to be in the Remote Learning Academy? Okay, I can see head shaking now. Thanks.
Mr. Asa.
So what we're talking about here is going from Remote Learning Academy to hybrid. We're not talking about full person, so that's a whole different ball game. But when we're talking about going from remote to hybrid, we're also talking at 50% class sizes. So if you've got 22, you may have 11 in the morning and 11 in the afternoon, correct? So we have to be mindful of the space in the classroom and the spacing of the desks and everything else that goes along with it. But that being said, I think this board has to be prepared for the superintendent to come to us and possibly have a year where we may have to be somewhat flexible on those rigid class sizes that we've had, and myself included, held to. Because if we have situations where it is possible and the spacing is possible to have that distancing where you may have 1 over in a class size, but because it's 50% and it doesn't affect the safety of the teacher or the students, I think we need to be prepared to think about that. And I'm just throwing that out there. I know it might not be popular, but it's something in unprecedented times that we may need to think about.
Thank you, Mr. Asa. Anything else about the projections? Okay, thank you, Dr. Parrish. Okay, moving on, school reopening update. Mr. Cummings?
Thank you. So I'm going to give a couple, we're going to talk about staffing, so Ms. DC, you're on deck. But let me just give you a couple things of kind of observational thoughts on today. And I think between those of us in central office, we hit just about every school. Some schools were blessed with multiple visits from us. But I will say to you, you know, I think I say, well, you've only listened to me once before about this, but I say it every year to myself if no one else is listening, that it always amazes me that you go into school 5 minutes into the start of any school year and the halls are empty and everybody's in class and the teachers are doing their thing. And I shouldn't be surprised anymore because this is my 35th year, but I'm still always amazed by it. It happened again this year. The only difference was everybody had a mask. You know, everybody, I was at Ward for the very beginning. The bell rang, students went off to homeroom. I was at Woods for the very opening, bell rang, everybody went into their homerooms. And the teachers began to work with them. And in both of those locations, They were doing some group activities in the rooms, and then they were also doing like a video that went throughout the entire school. Mr. Cavanna and Ms. Bannock were providing messages. Going after that to the other 2 middle schools, to 3 of the elementary schools, and then finishing my day at Fairfield Ludlow, which I'll talk about in a second. I just saw that scene repeated. You know, I was in the schools, I was at Burr, and I was in one of the 4th grade classrooms, and the teacher was doing a wonderful job. It was just about 11 o'clock, so she was transitioning those students to get ready to go home and talking to them about Google Classroom and how they would go through the afternoon and what they would be responsible for in the afternoon. And, you know, kind of just pointing out everything that they needed to do. I watched in one of our middle schools, we have some situations where teachers are remote teaching in because of certification needs. So the students are in the classroom on Chromebooks and the teacher's on the screen. And I watched as we worked through some technical issues that day, and it was Ms. Tiley at Roger Ludlow. And she was supporting the students. There was login issues. They haven't used their passwords in 3 months, those types of things we were working with. But there was a lot of that kind of, I guess what I would just put it at, people came together. You know, people at the simplest, best level, people came together to support the kids and to support each other. We did have some technical issues. The Wi-Fi was slow at particularly I think at the high school, but I'm sure that probably was related to other areas. I guess there was an issue. You know, our pipeline is the CEN pipeline, and I guess there was a blip in that earlier this morning. That might have been contributing, but these are things we're going to have to continue to work on during the course of the year. And I heard that particularly at the 2 high schools, as the teachers are working to put in the remote instruction. I will say that we were working this morning to make sure that everybody had their safety needs met, PPE met. We met with the FEA Executive Board this afternoon, the executive directors and myself, and we heard some more continuing concerns about just really by no means I think every one of these is important, but certain specific issues around lunch duties and things like that and how you properly support the teachers in that. So those are issues that we're working directly with the principals to continue to address. We have, Mr. Mancusi just texted me some photos of plexiglass barriers going out to a couple of classrooms at Ward that we requested this afternoon during the course of that meeting. So we're getting things out. We'll continue to get things out. We're making sure that everybody has their sanitizers, their masks, their face shields, the plexiglass. Plexiglass will be a process for a while. I know once it was out, more people have since requested it, so we're working our way through that list. So, you know, I think overall it was a very successful day. Quite a number of people, teachers spoke to me today that the anxiety we've all been feeling just felt better today when the kids were back, which I think we all kind of anticipated happening, but it was nice to see that promise fulfilled. But we have to continue to work on students with social distancing in the hallways. We're going to have to continue to work with students on properly wearing their masks. You know, we're going to have to continue to work on these things. You know, this is just day one. I will say, I pointed this out a little bit in my letter last week, but I want to emphasize here again that one of the things that we are behind on is the thing that concerns me the greatest about what we're behind on right now is the instructional focus. We started that work in July before the plan was adopted, and then once the plan was adopted and things shifted within the plan, we lost the ability to work with teachers around the instructional focus that they needed. So we have heard loud and clear from the teachers, and rightfully so, that they don't feel prepared for a lot of the instructional needs that have to happen this year. So that is the work coming out of the gate, and that'll be the work however long this race runs. And as I've said, and I'll continue to say, our teachers did a tremendous, tremendous job working through so much to get ready for the year, and they will continue to do a great job, but they're going to need the support of the community going forward in order to make these transitions happen, because what they're in pursuit of is a different instructional model that best suits this learning environment, and that is not something that is easily obtained. So But our commitment is to continue to support them. So with that said, I don't know if there's any questions for me, or if you want, I can have Ms. Deasy come up and talk about staffing.
Mr. Peterson?
I just have one detailed question. You mentioned classes with where the teacher is coming in remotely. In those situations, what's the supervision like in the classroom?
There will be either a paraprofessional, or in this case, when I was there today, well, Ms. Tyler was there, but there will be another teacher.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. Asa?
Is this an appropriate time to ask a transportation-related school reopening question?
We can bring that up later. You can start with transportation and relieve Ms. DC of her on-deck status.
If that was in your batting lineup, I'll wait till it comes up.
It's coming up, yeah. Everybody gets a turn.
Okay. Ms. Gerber?
Yeah, just I had a question, and I don't know, again, if you're going to be focusing on this later as well, in which case I can wait, because I know you're talking right now primarily about what was going on in the buildings, but I'm also just curious to hear how things went for the hybrid students who are at home today and the remote learning academy students.
I would say just, and this is a supposition based on the lack of emails, I think it went pretty well. I know that there was some confusion this morning about, we had a handful of students, I think, at every building that were in the wrong cohort. And I know that, I don't know if Dr. Zavachancik has an update on any of the remote, which we can get to. Yes, okay, so we can get to that today.
Okay. Ms.
I
Deasy?
forget how to work this. Hi, everyone. Colleen Deasy, Executive Director of Personnel and Legal Services. It's nice to be back. So the good news is that we were able to open today, and that is something that even as late as next week, I was not entirely sure we were going to have the staff to be able to do. We are still working on filling some of the staffing holes, as you've heard from Mr. Cummings, that there are places where admin are still filling in these first couple of days while we wait to get long-term subs who can do it on a longer-term basis. Some of the subject areas where we've had a particularly hard time were the same subject areas I brought up to you guys 2 weeks ago. So things like Spanish, art, family and consumer science, reading, special education. Those are areas where we have had great difficulty in finding long-term subs or even one-year contract teachers to be able to come in. And that's not to say anywhere has been easy. There have been positions like middle school ELA or middle school social studies where we normally have over 100 easily in the first week people apply for. We just, the applicant pool has not been as deep as it has been in the past. And it's not just for us, it's our neighbors around us are experiencing the same teacher shortage as well. So it has been difficult, and I should say that the brunt of that work has really been borne by our school administrators, who are reaching out to all of their contacts, networking, doing what they can do to get qualified folks into the building. So I certainly can't take credit for the work that's been done there. So the name of the game was getting people into classrooms for today. There's an accounting that now needs to be done for that. I don't have numbers for you tonight, but I will by the next board meeting around where we are for that. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for Ms. Deasy? Ms. Mascanelli?
So I'll come back to the question that I asked initially. Of those 196 requests, first of all, assuming it even stopped at 196, what was the result of those discussions?
And that will be part of my accounting. My estimate is that, so of 196, I would say 100 or so were certified staff. They were not all certified staff members who made those requests, and many of them weren't necessarily asking for full-time remote. Many of them were expressing concerns with childcare 1 or 2 days a week, depending on what their child's hometown hybrid schedule might be, right? So if someone lives in Trumbull and their kids are home on Monday and Tuesdays, they might have been asking for Monday and Tuesday remote work. And if someone is in a certified role that allows them to work remotely, then we were able to support that. So for some of them, they were accommodated, but not necessarily assigned to the Remote Learning Academy. And then for the people who did request full-time remote learning, some of them were accommodated to do that without being assigned to the remote learning academy. So an example of that might be an elementary art teacher who is, because they're doing all of their classes virtually, we were able to accommodate them to work remotely, even though they're not technically teaching in the remote learning academy, they're teaching their students in their home school.
And, but you're making it sound like all of the requests were honored, and I assume that is not the case.
That's not the case. I would estimate that we were able to honor 2/3 of them.
And then, what was the other question I'd asked about, regarding the 3 new hires? I can't remember what my question was. Sorry about that. I'll come back to it, sorry.
Ms. Picco, followed by Ms. Jacobson.
I just have a follow-up question to that. So of the third that we were not able to honor the requests, did we lose any of them?
We did lose some non-certified staff.
Ms. Jacobson?
So in those harder to fill areas that you're struggling with right now, I know you said that you were managed to put someone in the room. Do the Spanish classes have Spanish teachers at this point, et cetera?
I believe at this point there may be 1 or 2 that still do not have a Spanish substitute teacher. However, there is someone in the room, and the Spanish teacher who might be assigned to that class is teaching virtually. So it's almost like a flipped classroom in the most basic sense.
So students aren't missing teachers at this point in that proper area?
That's correct.
I want to jump in because I think there's, like, I'm aware, I want to be, that when I was at one of the elementary schools for this morning, for example, and at one of our middle schools, we're missing some music staffing. So students at that elementary school right now do not have a music teacher, and at that middle school, they're missing, some of the students are missing music classes because of that, our inability right now to find music teachers.
And I would just piggyback off of that and say, but neither of those absences is directly related to COVID. They're non-COVID absences that have been increasingly difficult to fill because of the teacher shortage.
Substitute?
Yes.
So are they getting, when those students log on for music, are they getting anything right now?
I don't believe at that I don't know about the middle school, I apologize. I don't think at the elementary school they are right now.
And was this communicated to parents? Because we just had some reports of people trying to log on and not, like, classes being MIA and not really sure what to make of that, whether or not the teacher was going to post something tomorrow, being that we're more at the secondary level.
At the secondary level, and I had a conversation with Mr. Hatzis today, I think some of the issue around the secondary level is email addresses and incorrect entry of email addresses, which is something we were discussing earlier this afternoon. We have to fix because I think in some cases, and I even saw it in the second grade class, the 6th grade class I was in today, the clerical part of that was wrong, which is making the mistake, which is making the problem.
Any other questions for Ms. Deasy? Ms. Jacobson? No? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
If you want to come up and talk about transportation, anything else you feel you want to talk about?
Do you want to ask your question first, or do you?
Mr. Asa, why don't you ask Ms. Munsell your question about transportation?
Okay, thank you. Question at all levels, but probably more pertinent to the elementary. Where did we wind up with the idea of trying to have bus monitors and assigned seating on the buses? Because I've personally thought that was like a huge mountain to climb. And based on what I saw today, it seems like that mountain was pretty high.
It was Mount Everest. We did succeed, though, in creating seat assignments across all levels. Everyone has a seat assignment in and out. We were not so successful with the bus monitors. So we operated last 2 days for the trial and today without them. Honestly, it seemed to go very well. We only have a handful. We advertised. We had one applicant, and we were able to garner interest of maybe 4 staff members internally. So that's an option if necessary, but right now that's about all we can do.
So in this economy, unemployment may look more attractive than a part-time bus monitor job. But so with regards to the assigned seating, I found that hard in my own mind to understand how that would work without a monitor, obviously, and how is the bus driver supposed to do that while picking up a kid and ensuring they go to their proper seat. Can you explain a little bit on that? Because I know, for example, and this is no criticism because this is first days, and quite honestly, I think it went great for the school that my son goes to and bus transportation. But he was not told about an assigned seat, so I'm just curious on that.
He was not told when he got on the bus, or we didn't tell anybody ahead of time because frankly they were just done the night before. The driver was to tell them, each child, when they got on the bus, where their seat was. The seats are actually marked along the side of the bus by row A's and B's and numbers. And they were given a number like A2, B3, whatever. And that's where they were assigned to go.
Okay, yeah, that didn't happen on that particular bus, but we can talk about that later, because it was more of the fill the bus from the back to the front mentality, which appears to be what followed today. So, but I can get you those details because I'm sure if it's not just one bus, it's probably throughout. And again, it's early on, and I'm not faulting a bus driver or anything like that, but just things that feedback. So I'll be curious to see if you get any other feedback from parents that matches that.
Were children told their bus seat in school by teachers? I mean, that might be helpful. Just like, I'm curious about the reverse when they're going back on the bus. Were they told, like, your seat A2?
Each school got their bus, their route with child's names and the seat assignment listed next to it. And they received both in and out in case a child forgot, in the morning. But yes, in the afternoon, the idea is that each school would have somebody stationed in each bus and line up students so that they're in order of how they need to get on, which is from the rear to the front. And obviously give the child their seat assignment number. And then it would remain constant every day, in and out.
And full disclosure, my kid is in 2nd grade, so it's quite possible that he gave me misinformation. But I was just what I was observing as he got off the bus. The last point I wanted to make was I think we just need to continue, and I don't know if it's at the school level or on a mass infinite campus broadcast, but we need to just keep reminding parents to remind their kids when they're on the bus, because there is no monitor. Masks need to be worn. One thing I did see today was as the bus pulled away, as my son got off, there were 3 kids remaining on the bus. They were all in the back, which probably makes sense if seat assignments were done. But all 3 of them had their mask pulled down below their chin. So it's going to be on us as parents as well to just keep reminding, and it will become second nature, but I just throw that out there. Thank you.
So it was on, but not in place.
It was doing a good job protecting the chin.
While I'm here talking about transportation, you had asked for the number of parents that had opted out of transportation. When the survey originally closed, it was 3,600 that said no, they had transportation. As of September 1st, it was 3,400. So when 200 people dropped, changed. And interestingly enough, the ones that said yes, as of when the survey closed, was 2,950, and as of 9/1, it was 4,286. So there are almost 1336 changes in that amount of time. And I just learned today that we had 200 changes today. So transportation is very challenging this year, just like everything else is. So we just ask that everybody be patient with us.
Okay. Mr. Asa, followed by Mr. Peterson, then Mrs. Mazzucchelli.
Yeah, just the last thing. This kind of piggybacks on what Mr. Cummings was talking about before with open windows on going back and forth. And I know we have a legal requirement to provide transportation. So whatever we can find out as far as, what the state's going to back us or not. But I would hope that we can try and do a little bit tighter on that change, because I can only imagine what the transportation director and you and others are going through. So thank you. And a big, big pat on the back to all of you in transportation.
Mr. Peterson?
Just a brief question, and forgive me, this actually maybe more for Mr. Cummings. I can't remember if this has been discussed at all with all the things we've talked about over the course of the summer. Has there been any outreach or consideration of involving the PTAs in terms of getting volunteers to be bus monitors?
No, we haven't gone down that road. I think we first wanted to see if we could get, if we would pay people for that. I don't know if there'd be any legal issues around volunteers on this. I don't know. I think that's something we'd have to look at because of just the nature of the assignment.
I mean, I guess I imagine we'll see in the days to come how essential that role is going to be in keeping the kids in line on the bus. It seems like another pool that we could attempt to tap if there's no other legal obstacle.
I did talk to First Student about that, and they would have to have a full background check to get on the bus, so that takes some time.
Mrs. Mazzucchelli?
Thank you. So two of my questions were already asked, which is about the numbers opting out of transportation and about the parent volunteers. And so therefore, I was just wondering, Mr. Cummings, if you got any feedback on how dismissal is working. I know at my school it was an absolute zoo, and I'm curious, with all of these parents now in a position of picking up at the buildings, how is that working out? Are we possibly needing to consider staggered dismissal times or anything like that, or how did that work today?
I got some feedback. I had to leave. I was as I was saying, I was at Burr right before dismissal, but I had to leave to get back to central office at that point. So one of my plans for tomorrow is to be at an elementary school for dismissal and at another elementary school for the afternoon arrival. I did hear, talking to the principals, that the traffic, on Uncler Road was an issue. I do know, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but we did have police support at most of the schools to direct traffic. When I was leaving Burr, and there's no doubt in my mind that these two things are connected, the amount of cars coming into the driveway and then going back towards Burr Street to the Parkway overpass, I have no doubt that there were people in their cars changing their transportation requests as I drove by them. There's no, I mean, I could not even, so I think that those two things are going to be related, and some of that will ease up. But the principals had a lot of concern about dismissal and having it happen quickly enough because, as Ms. Mansell said, there's this, especially at the beginning of the year, you got to line up in a certain order, and now you got to learn the order. And that may be fine for a fifth grader, but kindergarten, first grader, we're starting to get to know each other, and who you stand behind is all going to be things that we're going to have to work through.
And just to clarify, when I made the reference zoo, that's the district where I work, not where my child is attending. So
I got that.
And so you mentioned specifically Umpqua Road, because obviously we'd had the specific concern about the two middle schools in such close proximity there. And so, I mean, I don't think you can tell after a day, but is there a possibility, or do you think we're going to stick with this? But any possibility that after a week, 2 weeks, if it's just too horrendous, that we're going to have to look at the schedules there?
The issue will be, it's one thing to stagger the time for the car arrivals. The other issue is then we start to get into the different bus tiers and the different arrivals there. So I think we were going to try to do everything we can to avoid that.
Ms. Jacobson?
Just curious, is there a time expectation in order to change going back onto the bus? Only because I can imagine that would cause change in routes, pickup times for everyone else on that bus potentially, and that there must be some lead time on that in order to reroute everything.
I think Ms. Munsell can speak to that.
Yeah, we asked for the same 10-day timeframe.
Okay, that's what I wanted to find out, is if it was the same. And then, I know when we had discussed this months ago about the transportation deficiency in the hybrid model, if we end up with everyone wanting to be back on the bus again, how are we going to handle that load at 50% capacity? We were going to be needing like 177 more buses and like $20 million to do that. So, just as a reminder.
It's something we have to look at. I will tell you that, I don't know, Ms. Munsell, if you know this, you would have better information on this than I. I am not aware of any district that's facing this very issue, that went and found more buses. First of all, found them, never mind employed them. So there has to be other remediation efforts or mitigation efforts on the bus to address this issue, because there's only so much you can do, and buses are not available, never mind drivers.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Just to piggyback on Mrs. Jacobson's comment, so for the parents and the public watching this, should we be advising them to check Infinite Campus every couple days to see if their route time has changed for pickup, or do you have any advice on that for the general public with kids on the buses?
Yes, depending on the change, the best bet is to check with Infinite Campus. The transportation office does try to notify parent if there was a specific, directive to them about a situation. They try to contact them, but the best bet is to look at Infinite Campus continuously to monitor when the change is.
Thank you, Ms. Munsell.
Then I'd ask if perhaps both Dr. Zavichenzik and Dr. Parrish want to speak a little bit about the remote learning academy. I know that there was another webinar tonight that Ms. Roxby put together for parents on that, and the question had come up earlier about some of the staffing issues. So I don't know if you want to speak to, if there's anything you want to add, or if there's any questions about remote learning academy. I leave it to the board if they should come up.
Okay. Any questions about Remote Learning Academy? Ms. Jacobson?
I just have a question on remote learning in general, whether it be the RLA or our hybrid learners at home. And this is specific to the new guidance that came out, and I'm just wondering if that's going to make everyone, this might be a curriculum question, but readdress how the day is structured, or were we already planning for that amount of time, et cetera?
I don't think, I'm not following you. I'm sorry.
The new guidance on the amount of time that...
that the state put out.
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
yes. Addendum number 12 that we got after school opened.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. So that, sorry. Is that going to require us to reassess how we're structuring RLA or our remote days, or are we good with that as it stands right now?
When I looked at the guidance over the weekend, I think we're in pretty good shape. I mean, I think the three of us need to sit down and look at it again, together. But I looked at it and thought we were in pretty good shape. They have some pretty broad definitions that I think we fall comfortably within. But I think it bears another look from central office, and let us take that on.
Great news. All right, thank you.
Any questions? Ms. Max Connelly?
I would just, because a few people have asked me, I was hoping that you could explain just, I understand how the Remote Learning Academy is working for K through 8, but if you could just explain how it's working in the high school now, and that's as much so that I can better answer questions that I've received about it, and I don't want to say it wrong beyond the reference to live, but what are the expectations? What is the structure to that?
So at the high school level, because of the number of unique courses, I think it was around 238 different courses that the students who were opting into remote had in their schedules, we did have to follow a different model for those students. So they're keeping their original schedule, and the teachers are allowing access to their class during the direct instruction segment of their lesson that they're doing in front of their hybrid kids. So if I'm always remote student, I'm logging into Google Meets during my first period chemistry class, and I'm watching the instruction being delivered by my teacher that's being delivered in front of the other students who are actually physically inside of the room. So in order to do that, there were some technology assessments that we needed to do in order to ensure that teachers had the cameras and things that they need in order to make sure that students at home are able to actually view those lessons. And so working with the IT team, we just got a whole host of additional webcams and some headsets that she's going to now be distributing out to the high schools in order to better support what's already in place within the high schools. So that's some of the things that they're doing in terms of making sure that we're able to better provide access to the actual live instruction that's taking place in the class.
And so just to clarify, if the remote learner's last name is Adams, they would be in the Monday through Thursday cohort as a remote learner, so they would tap in live Monday, Thursday, and then Tuesday and Friday do the remote in terms of that hybrid model, so they're not in live 4 days a week, are they?
No. So they're not, they wouldn't be live all 4 days. They would basically be live 2 of the 4 days that the hybrid students are in person.
And then join the rest of the class on Wednesday.
Wednesday, they're all joined together, both cohorts, both hybrid cohorts and those students who are always remote.
And how is assessment being handled with them?
So assessments would have to be done.
Hint, hint, I'm looking for some guidance here as well, so just wondering. But in all honesty, because that was a last minute thing, obviously, that the teachers are having to adjust to. So how are they being supported with that?
So looking at ways in which to do smaller assessments, trying to move away from some of the larger, end of unit assessments and some of the more smaller chunked assessments that they could possibly do more frequently, so they have a better gauge of how the students are doing. But those assessments would have to be accessible online because those students aren't physically in the building to be able to complete them in front of the teacher. So it's definitely going to be some challenges. I know our program directors were looking at, particularly in math, some of the ways in which there can be adjustments made to the actual assessment method that had been traditionally used in a high school setting.
Ms. Pico?
Hi. So for the webcams or whatever technology they're using in the classrooms, are the students that are in class in view of the camera?
So the camera is to be directed at the teacher delivering the instruction. One of the things we're trying to make sure that we communicate to teachers is that we have to make sure that whatever privacy restrictions are that we have to abide by, that's taken into consideration when having the students stream into the class. It's really about where the placement of the camera is, which is why we're trying to deploy some additional webcams, because in some cases, teachers are using laptops that have cameras because their desktop might not necessarily have a camera directly on it.
I think that's the part that everybody gets a little confused on, of what actually is live streaming versus, you're on a Zoom
and the students can see me, and I've got maybe like a presentation up, and they can hear what's going on in the classroom, but they can't actually see the students. And I think that's important because we don't want to violate anybody's rights that are in that class. I think because how it happened so fast, there's so many questions out there to the public, and maybe if we can put something together to just clarify everything.
We were working today on, Mr. Mancusi put out last year in March, that guidance around live video instruction and things like that. It hit us today that we need to revise that and bring that out. And there's been some revisions in some of the attorney language that's been provided to us. So Ms. Deasy shared with us that late this afternoon, and we're going to be working on that.
Is attendance mandatory? I don't know who this goes to.
Attendance is mandatory. In all models, attendance is mandatory. The state issued some guidance on Friday. It came in the same email as the hybrid and remote. As I said to the administrators today, they're working too on the Y2K guidance, so we're expected to have that soon. The attendance is mandatory, but it's kind of, there's different ways that students can show that attendance. So there could be the physical presence in the classroom. It could also be the submission of work within a timeline. So if a student is not available for Dr. Parrish was talking about, the student isn't available for the actual online instruction, if they submit the work, then they're counted as attending too.
So just to clarify, for every day, for 5 days a week, students are expected to check in with their classes and complete whatever the attendance assignment is for that class, just like it was last year for Google Classroom.
That is correct. And we have, I may be getting this confused, but, and I apologize, I think every 2 weeks we have to send an attendance report to the state now. All districts do. Because this is one of the major state concerns, is that students are continuing to access their education during hybrid or remote or whatever models districts are using.
Thank you. Ms. Jacobson.
Also, and I just happened to come upon this because of my girls today, but there was also something in Infinite Campus that they happened to stumble upon for attendance in each class that they have to actually physically click on. And I don't think that I had even heard of that or knew about that. And it was like oh my God, tell all your friends, this is what you have to do type of thing. So can you just touch on that briefly, that it's not only going into your class, doing a check-in, doing the work, but there is actually something in Infinite Campus that they have to do for every period, right?
That's correct. Infinite Campus is part of their, one of their upgrades, and particularly in response to instruction during the pandemic, has created this alternate means of logging attendance, which fits into the one of the state expectations, one of the methods that the state approves of. So it's not the only way. Again, teachers can continue to do it the way they want, but if for a student who's on hybrid and not at home and not seeing the teacher that day, that is the way to do it. And I believe the schools are communicating that out, because right after I sent the information on the attendance today, Mr. Mono in our IT department sent me this upgrade, which I had forgotten about. I think it was available back in July.
So is that once in the beginning of the day, or literally at the bell for each period, that students at all levels need to know to do that?
It's within the period time frame. Well, I don't believe it's even within the period time frame, because I think that if it's within the day, and again, going back to the idea that some student may not be available during the school hours, but is working, in the afternoon or evening, they can get attendant.
So at 8 o'clock in the morning, you could click through all through 8 periods or all through 4 periods and here, right at that time.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
Just if we could clarify that and get something out, because I don't think everyone knows that at all. Just on that, sorry. Just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. And if that didn't happen today because no one knew about it, that won't be an unexcused absence, will it? Showing up on people's calendars?
No.
Okay, thank you.
And if it is, I think people need to this is, again, one of the issues we're going to work through.
Okay, so just if we could check if that have massive amounts of unexcused absences today, that they get wiped out or something. All right, thank you.
Mrs. Gerber.
Just one thing I think that some parents have mentioned is just confusion, I think especially in the upper grades, in terms of not getting the information about classes prior to the classes and not being sure who to contact other than the teacher him or herself. So I know for K through 8, if you have kind of like a general distance learning question, you would want to contact Eileen Roxby, is my understanding. But for 9 through 12, is it just the individual teacher if you're having an issue, or do you contact the teacher and the guidance counselor, or the teacher, the guidance counselor, and the housemaster? Just wasn't quite sure exactly if there's like some kind of stock answer that we can give parents, just because I think there was a fair amount of confusion, and just being able to have a specific contact person or persons who they can reach out to would be helpful.
No way to answer this without anybody getting mad at me. So the best thing that people should do is, when I was at Ward, for example, first thing this morning, the guidance counselors were going around. They were fielding these questions from parents, and I saw them in the hallways talking to different teachers and making sure. So I would say that the best thing is, especially if they've got multiples, is to contact the guidance counselor. There's a lot of email now going out between guidance and individual instructors.
Okay, so then it would be guidance. And then I guess the other question too, just to circle back to the transportation questions that were being discussed before, because it sounds like they've been pretty busy. So if there is a transportation question, that would only be able to go to the transportation department, or would they want to maybe also deal with the guidance counselors? Just
No, they should, for transportation, correct me, Ms. Munsell, but they should be going to transportation directly for transportation questions, correct?
right, and just with the understanding that they have been getting a lot of requests and questions, and so and not getting an immediate response does not mean that they haven't received it. It's simply a matter of just pure numbers.
That's correct. It's just, given the numbers Ms. Munsell said, it's going to
Right,
take a little bit
exactly.
of time. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this? Remote learning?
I don't know if there's any questions on
Thank you.
opening, any other questions that I won't just call people up because we want to see their faces. It's been so long, but if you've got questions, I'd be glad to bring them out.
Mrs. Maxinelli?
Okay, so just one general question. You sort of opened the door for it already, but obviously you're going to have to keep working on this process over the next weeks, addressing all of the issues as quickly as possible, and we know that will be taking place. What is going to be the process for assessing the students' mastery or not of the 2019-2020 curriculum for their grade and their courses and going forward? I mean, what is going to be happening for that? Because I'm sure teachers are not only feeling, a little bit overwhelmed at, I've got so much to cover and it's going to be so much harder to deal with my kids, teach them, do all the work at K through 12, but then there's also the factor of, wait a minute, I expected them to be at this level and they are not. So that whole instructional piece that you referenced, that you had started with on July and then really didn't quite tackle as fully as you wanted, what is the plan for that?
The program directors have had conversation around this, and I want to kind of handle this in two different ways. One of the questions that's come up, we had a conversation about, whether it was last Wednesday already, was a question around the kind of, I'll put a label on it, the STAR assessments, right? And doing STAR assessments. And I made clear, and I don't think I was arguing with anybody, I just made clear that to my mind, that type of thing really needed to wait. The last thing I really wanted to communicate to our parents and to our kids was, you're back, now sit down in front of a computer and let's figure out where you are. I think that type of number, for example, can get overhyped given the circumstances around it. And to my mind, it was far more important that teachers spend time with students getting a sense of their reading, their writing, their math needs, in small formative type assessments that Dr. Parrish referenced, for example. I think that there's an opportunity when you speak with students in that way to build the relationships that we really are going to be counting on, because, speaking quite frankly, I think we're all worried that we're fighting the clock. And that great advantage we had in March when we went away from each other was that we knew each other for 7 months, and now we may not have that again. So every day we have together counts towards that. So I know that's not exactly what, I don't believe that's exactly what you're referencing, but I just want to point that out, that that's something. At the same time, one of the things that was worked on this summer, and I know is continuing to be worked on, is, for example, in social studies classes, students are getting writing assignments, you know, to the power standards that essentially go through the social studies curriculum and the C3. You know, are they taking an inquiry stance? Are they backing their arguments up with evidence? You know, are they making strong arguments in defense of a topic or an argument, right? So those are all things that, just to give one example, we're looking, the time spent this summer was on what are the power standards within a curriculum and how do they kind of bridge year to year. This is a little bit more difficult in math and, say, the foreign languages, the world languages, because it's so scaffolded. And I think that there's an anticipation that we're going to have to probably do some backfilling for those things. But again, settling the students first in order to be able to do that. Now, high school teachers may take a day or two to settle them, whereas elementary should probably take a little bit longer. So I don't know if I'm answering your question appropriately, Ms. Maxichelli, but we had some debate in the spring, honestly, about, you know, when we come back, is it SEL all the time, or are we going to assess these kids? And and I'm not the only one, but I've said I don't think those two things are separate things. I think you can put those hand in hand as you get to know students, because if you need to know where they are academically and what their needs are academically, because if you're not meeting their social emotional needs either.
Before we move on, just Mr. Papa George, and getting ready just for the physical plant of our buildings, are there any unforeseen challenges in terms of supplies, cleaning, staffing that we need to know about?
I'm actually lucky to come up here and say, as of right now, things are running fairly smoothly. We've had some hiccups, but we've overcome them, and we're moving along.
So no concerns about the supply chain for hand sanitizer, soap, water filling stations. I know that when you reported to us over the summer, there were some things that were on back order, filters.
So filters are always a concern. We've processed the purchase order for them. They've been ordered. They're starting to trickle in. We're replacing them as they come in, so we hope to get them all done within the next 60 days or so. But again, it's just as they come in, we're putting them out right away.
Mrs. Maxichelli.
And just to follow up on that, these are the filters that exceed the state guidelines. The filters we have, we're fine district-wide for the filters we have. These are...
We currently use MERV 8 filters. We are upgrading to a MERV 13 filter.
And the state recommends?
The state recommends 13 or 14 filters. 14s are just not available anywhere, so that's why we went with the 13s, which are, like I said, the state says 13 or 14. We also worked with the town's health department, and they recognized the 13s would be a good upgrade for us to do at this time. And also with our engineers, that they recommended the 13s as well, because some of our older systems wouldn't be able to handle the back pressure of a 14.
But the MERV 8 is what the state required?
No, MERV 8 is what we currently have, so that's what we've always used in our system. So we're in the process of upgrading them now.
Okay. But the MERV 8 is not, the state does not require a certain level. It's just a higher level of recommendation.
The recommendation was to upgrade your filters. They didn't give specific numbers. They said you should look at upgrading your systems and your filters, and that's what we are doing.
Okay. And then just one other quick follow-up, to again follow up on Ms. Vitale's opening question. The protocols that the district has in place across all of our buildings, we have the necessary equipment to fulfill those protocols.
We do. We did have hurdles over the summer to get supplies in. We've figured out different ventures, different ways of getting them, and to the point where some of our stuff, like our new hand sanitizer dispensers that are starting to roll in now, are actually on a lease program, which is actually better off, we believe, because now they are the property of the company, and if something breaks on it, they come right out and replace it.
And we received a lot of just emails from teachers about supplies and concerns. Can you just share for the board, just in terms of if we're a large district, we have a lot of classrooms. If there is a problem, what would be the protocol to, let you know that there's a problem? Do they talk to the headmaster? Is there a system that they put the request into?
We've actually set up our school due work order system so that now in the drop down, they can request a COVID-related supply, and it goes right out, and it gets filtered right to the correct people to get it to them.
And have all those requests been made, or are we still trying to fulfill some of them?
The only ones that we're still fulfilling at this point are for, we're plexiglass, because we're looking at each individual request to see the need and what the response will be for it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Jacobson?
I'm just curious about the tents, really. Are those up and operational? Were those used today? Just an update on those.
They are not all up. The final 7 tents that were supposed to be installed yesterday arrived from the manufacturer. They started putting them up, and the legs started snapping at the welds. So for safety reasons, we called the manufacturer and the company, and they are recalling the legs, and they're going to replace them. We don't have a date yet. We're pushing for this Saturday for the last 7 tents to be put up, but we don't know from the manufacturer yet if that's going to be possible because they're coming from Texas.
Were they different than the original deliveries?
The only difference was they were brand new from the manufacturer, and the ones that were put up the week before were actually used tents that we had purchased.
Those are okay.
Those are all okay, yes. We feel that the manufacturer rushed the order for the tent company we were dealing with, and they may have laxed on the welding.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Peterson?
Just to follow up on that, is there, with the tents that we don't have, is there any facility now that doesn't have a tented outside space?
There are a few of them with the tents. That's why we're hoping to get them up by this Saturday.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Papageorge? Okay, thank you. Sorry, angle's off.
So I think, I'm afraid that there's some confusion about the filters that just occurred based on the dialogue between you and Mrs. Maxon Kennelly. So I just want it to be very clear that we opened our buildings in compliance, and that the recommendation of the state is to upgrade the filters, but that was not a requirement to have in place prior to opening our doors, correct?
That is correct. We
Thank
opened
you.
in compliance.
Thank you, Mr. Asa. Any other questions? And Mr. Papageorge, I want you just to know that if you're facing any sort of challenges with supplies or staffing, that you just need to come to us as soon as possible. We appreciate this huge task before you, and that there may be challenges in getting things, and we need to know that so we can advocate for you, potentially at the state level. We're still just chairs and reaching out to our state reps just to help us, with the supply chain, because I think that is something that the state really can help the district with. So don't hesitate to come to us if there's a need.
I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments about school reopening? Ms. Lieber?
I was just wondering if we could get an update about our students receiving special education services and whether any children were able to be in both AM and PM cohorts, and then how those types of decisions were made.
You have to press. At the bottom, the button. Hold it down when you're talking.
Oh, okay. I apologize. Good evening, everybody. Rob Mancusi, Special Education Director. So as you know, we have been talking about Addendum 3, page 1, the characteristics on that page for our students with high needs. And those are the students right now that we've offered full in-person learning for. So we have about, I think the last time I counted, it was 90-something. Our families were very pleased that we were offering full-time programming for our students with high needs, who our CLC students meet the definition of students with high needs. What we did is, because this is a health and safety situation we're in, we added one non-certified staff person to each CLC to allow for a one-to-one staffing model that we had a couple of years ago that does not include the teacher. We have gone through a lot of plexiglass, thanks to the maintenance office. They were able to put together a bunch of plexiglass barriers for use with our CLC students because they are the ones who have the most difficulty social distancing. So what I would say is our families are very happy just by their sheer response in terms of the number of students who have returned to full-time. We do have some CLC families who have chosen just to come half of the day, but most of our students are back full-time. And I will say our staff is happy they're back to full-time. We're happy they're back to full-time. Today was a great day to see little kids again with their teachers. You would never know, like Mr. Cummings said, if kids did not have masks on or staff did not have masks on, you would never have known that, we're going through a global pandemic.
Thank you for that. Can I just one follow-up question? Is there any bandwidth for opening up more full-time spaces for other kids who maybe don't fit the definition for high needs and being in a CLC, but have quite a number of service hours in a week?
It's something we're seriously considering because I have been contacted by a number of families and there is a need.
Thank you.
Ms. Jacobson?
This may seem like a question, but does anyone know how lunch went today? Like in terms of getting food and room? Do we have any reports on that? I know that was desk set up and just, does anyone know? If not, we can talk about it another time. I'm just curious how lunch went.
I heard it was good. No, we have a couple things to work on. I think that Mr. Hatz has demonstrated to me today the proper application of math principles in separating desks in the cafeterias. And in listening in the conversation we had with FEA today, I think a number of the principals should tour the Fairfield Ludlow cafeteria because he really, in all seriousness, expanded the use while maintaining social distances. He was able to get more students in there. So, but I understand it went pretty well. When I was at Burr, they were delivering lunches to the students who were taking them home. They were having plastic bags and ready to go out the door with them. So these are things we're going to continue to work through, particularly at the secondary level, because with those students having lunch during part of their day.
Ms. Lieber?
This is, Mrs. Jacobson just reminded me, I have seen some competing ideas on whether or not snack is allowed in elementary school, and some schools being told yes, a nut-free snack, and some schools being told no snack. Is there any clarification on that?
Do doctors have a chance if this has come up with the elementary level? This was an elementary question, correct? Yeah.
So snacks has come up multiple times at the elementary level. The building principals have made some decisions. I know, for example, they looked at bus routes, and some students were beginning their day at 8 o'clock and finishing it after noon, so they have allowed snack. And others have felt that they didn't need to have snack as a result of the shortened day. There's been no moratorium on snack, if that's what you're asking. We've not put out a regulation to say you cannot have snack in the building.
Perfect. So that snack is not a safety issue for children.
It is not.
Thanks.
Mr. Asa?
This brings me to a point I'm glad it came up. Thank you, Mrs. Jacobson. several people had asked me to bring this up tonight, and I was about to forget. With regard to lunch at the elementary, so I understand that grab and go as you leave from the AM cohort to take home. Can you give a little bit more clarity on the lunch on arrival? Because it was stated that lunch will not be, lunch will be available to any child that needs it. But I think there was a little confusion at some of the schools today as to whether their kid was allowed to bring a lunch versus getting one on arrival if they didn't order it.
So I can weigh in on this. So late breaking news. We heard today that I think it's the federal government. Is that right, Ms. Mansell? The federal government is the lunch program? Okay. It was a Y2K bug. So the state is now allowing the summer meals program essentially to continue into the school year, which does a couple things. One, it opens up lunch to all students, regardless of lunch status. And at the high schools and at McKinley and Holland Hill, it also opens up breakfast for all students if they wish to have it. But what's that? Middle school too. The most important thing it does is it allows us now to have the afternoon cohort take lunch home the night before so they can have it before coming to school. Ideally, we would, given the length of the school day in the afternoon at the the length of the morning cohort as well, we would like to not have lunch in the school just because and we were accommodating it obviously because of a need. But if we can have students take the lunch home, and this also, by the way, applies to over the weekends, just like it was during the summer. If we can have them take lunch home now, we should do all we can to get lunch out of the academic day. It's a late start as it is, and if students can eat before coming to school, they're going to be better prepared to be in school.
Okay, so that's a really good point, that building principals at the elementary level need to blast out tonight to all families. And also,
hold on, Mr. Hayes, I just want we're not starting this till like Monday.
Oh, okay,
We just found out.
because the reason I say this is that at the programs like Wakeman and some of the others, I think there's some confusion there where kids like today may not have been able to eat at Wakeman prior to coming to the school because the program thought that based on the language that they would actually eat in the cafeteria when they arrived and then go to class. But what Mr. Cummings said makes a lot of sense as far as there's just not enough time. So if we can at least get that message out to those three programs that are working with the district so they can blast out to their people, that would be very helpful for all those families.
Ms. Leeper.
I just want to clarify, when you say that lunch is available now, regardless of status, lunch is free for every family, regardless of qualifying status? Yes?
Ms. Mansell says yes.
And
Great, thank you.
And just a reminder, as we're talking about eating in the classroom, concern about students taking off their mask to eat in the classroom was a determining factor, in part, for going to the hybrid. So I think that we just really do not want to encourage that as best we can, at least at this particular point. Any other questions about reopening? I just want to add that I drove around this morning a little bit, and I did see elementary schoolers walking to school and arriving at school, and there was a lot of excitement, and everybody seemed to be very happy. So you would not necessarily know that we were in the midst of the pandemic, except for the masks. And I actually think probably in some neighborhoods more families were walking. It was nice to see. So thank you to those schools who decorated outside and made the arrival to school exciting. And I hope that the same thing happens tomorrow at the secondary level for those students who the first day of in-person instruction is happening tomorrow. So on to adoption of policies. Recommend a motion that the Board of Education adopt the following policies. C19-1, temporary policies and regulations related to the COVID-19 pandemic. C19-2, health and safety protocols related to the COVID-19 pandemic. C19-3, Families First Coronavirus Response Act leave. C19.4, green cleaning. C19.5, community use of school facilities. C19.6, visit to the schools. C19.7, school volunteers. C19.9, transportation. Can I have a motion? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, a second. Mrs. Gerber. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, thank you, first of all, to you and your committee for all of your work on these policies. The floor is yours.
So I didn't receive any questions about them. I like to think that we are so crisp in our choice of language that explains everything. But of course, if anyone has any questions here now, I'd be happy to address them.
The board have any questions for Ms. Maxon Kennelly? Okay. Seeing none, we will take it to the board for a vote. All in favor? Motion carries 9-0. Thank you. Moving on. Approval of the Mill Hill project number 051-0149EA, Phase 2, FFE, plans and specifications. That the Board of Education approve the Mill Hill project, what I just said. Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Mr. Asa. Mr. Cummings, do you have anything? The board received a very long packet to review. Any questions on this? This is, typical for our building projects that this has to come before the board. I don't know if you want to add anything to
No,
that.
I've got nothing to add to this unless there's any questions.
Okay. Mr. Asa?
Just for the public, like you said, this is a formality in the process, and to this point, maybe Mrs. Gerber can touch on this, but it appears from what I've read and understand, we're still on track and on budget, correct?
Yes, as of now, things are going well. In fact, they're going so well that the building committee canceled their meeting for tomorrow night because there wasn't any business for them to take up. So, they, like I said at our last meeting, they have started work, and obviously now it's an occupied renovation, so that comes with its own set of complications that, this isn't the first time we've had one of these, so, but luckily we have Mr. Quinn, who has experience through Holland Hill and Riverfield, so, his leadership will definitely be valuable on that level.
Thank you. And I didn't see it. It doesn't look like anybody's trying to sneak anything in, so this is all looking good.
And this is just as part of the approval project for the state that the board needs to approve this as the project moves forward. But for the public, once again, the building committee does oversee this renovation project. Throughout the project, certain things have to come to us for approval, and this is one of those instances. So seeing no questions right now, we'll take to the board for a vote. All in favor? Motion carries 9-0. Thank you. Financial review of 2019-2020 fiscal year. Mrs. Munsell?
I'm going to talk about enclosure 4A first, which is the transfers. The first column are the projected balances that you saw at the end of June. Second column is what the actual balance, what the balances were actually on June 30th. I'll just go over some of the areas where we knew we expected savings. And salaries, obviously, you might remember that subs would normally be a much larger deficit. Right here, they sort of wash each other out, but attrition typically covers a deficit in subs, but with no subs since March, there were savings there. We had savings in utilities of over $1 million, transportation, legal fees, school balances, tech equipment and maintenance, service contracts. There were no click charges on the printing. Areas that we went over, we knew about health insurance. Special ed wasn't over as much as we anticipated. Areas that we did buy, things that put us over were software, tech equipment, and maintenance projects. That brought us down to a balance of 3,592. Column 3 are the transfers that you approved in June. Column 5 is what the actual balance was when we closed the end of July 31st. So we ended up with a balance of 3,641. Column 6 were the transfers that we had to make to balance out. You'll notice that under support expenses, line 33 and 34 is where we put the excess funding to be able to go into the non-lapsing account. Line 34 is the $3.3 million that the MOU between the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance had agreed to. The 3.3 is actually stated in there as a transfer. Line 33 is the residual balance. We have, by statute, a maximum of 3.6, where's my number? 3.644, I think it is. And with after the 3.3, there's a $333,000 additional amount available to transfer that would require Board of Finance approval. That hasn't been done yet. Those transfers have not been made. And then column 7 is the final balance after those transfers. And if you go down the column, it's the same 3.641. If we back out the 3.3 that's in the MOU, the additional transfer that could be made with Board of Finance approval of the 333, that leaves a residual balance of 7696 that will be reverted back to the town. Originally, I might have reported that we thought the balance back to the town was 22,000, but there was there were some nursing, town nursing costs that hadn't been posted yet. So with that, it comes down to the 7696. That's on that page. Are there any questions with this page?
Any questions for Mrs. Munsell? No? Okay, you can go on.
The next two pages, 4B and 4C, is basically the same information, just in a different format. Then we get on to 4D is that brings us to this year because of the deposit into non-lapsing account and the 333 that's in question. I thought you should see an updated COVID cost. So these are as of 9/2. The last one that you received was 8/21. It's changed by approximately 200,000. Most of the activity there obviously is in maintenance. More PPE. There was additional traffic control. Some line painting. The tents were a little bit more than were originally in there for, and the filters were more expensive. So, and in technology, there were ebbs and flows there, but there were some cases that brought that up. So that's what makes up that $200,000 difference. So that brings us down. Column 1 is the total column on this document. So it brings us down to line 42 to 4.1 million. Then the non-lapsing fund, the 1777, that's the difference between the 1.522 million that we moved from the Board of Ed budget into non-lapsing. And the 177 brings you to the 3.3 million. The 231 is a firm number. That was the ESSER that we applied for and were awarded. This next number, the State Corona Relief Fund, also known as CRF, we were notified of the 712,000, and then the state sent out an adjustment on transportation, and that's all they sent out was the adjustment on transportation, and that was a reduction of about 22,000. So, I did a schedule and sent it to them and said, okay, what does this mean? Is this the only adjustment? Do we get the rest of the money? There's been no reply on that. Other districts are also questioning how the number came to be. The state is saying, well, it's subject to change because you're going to have to show your expenses, report expenses in order to get the money. So that number is very much subject to change. That brings us down to a deficit of almost 1.4. And then if we were to get approval from the Board of Finance for the additional 333, it brings us down to a deficit of about $1,050,000.
Ms. Jacobson?
You're ready for questions. I just wanted to, it's okay if I ask a question? Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Just one thing. I know the last time we went over this, we hadn't changed kind of the model for the elementary remote learning academy yet. So that was part of the expense for the long-term substitutes for RLA, which we're no longer needing since we staffed it internally. So I'm just wondering why that remains on this sheet.
Well, that was as of 9/2, and I don't know that we knew that at that point.
Right, so this is as of 9/2, so that might not be the case for that line item, correct? We wouldn't have that line item anymore, unless we need it for some other reason. That would be a $400,000 savings. But we don't know that yet. Well, at this point, we're not hiring these long-term substitutes for the RLA, correct? Unsure.
But there will still be a need for long-term subs in other areas, potentially.
Yeah.
So that is the accounting that I need to do, that we did hire long-term subs and we did hire, we essentially, when we've moved people out of their classrooms and set up these other classrooms, we have increased FTE. So while there could be $100,000 savings on that specific line item for that specific reason, I'm not confident that we're going to have any savings at all in terms of staffing for this year.
Okay, so it might look a little bit different in what the need is, but the dollar amount won't be wiped off this sheet then. Okay, thank you.
Wait, before Colleen goes.
Okay.
I was going to ask the same question about bus monitors, which is on this list.
That,
And we heard earlier.
I will let Ms. Munsell answer.
Hold on. Wait, let Mrs. McAnally.
I had both of those same questions, but once this does get resolved, if there's something of note in how this is all shaking out in terms of the staffing, if we could have that as an update or as a memo once it's known, because I shared the same question on the same two lines, just in terms of how we're going forward operationally, so if that'd be possible.
Is it the accounting that Ms. Deasy's speaking of that you're looking for in that?
Oh, I guess I want to know how many bodies we have, like, how are we educating the students, you know, and how many classrooms is it actually being manned by two people? One, a sub sitting there for discipline purposes because the teacher is teaching via a smartboard or something, you know, just exactly how we're taking care of the staffing of this educational experience, if we could have, but I definitely get that you don't have that yet.
So we would want that accounting, and this, I mean, this spreadsheet, as Ms. Munsell said at our last meeting, is going to be changing, and what is current today may not be current tomorrow as needs are identified and things are going to move on and move off. Any other questions for Ms. Deasy? Ms. Picco? No, mine's for Mrs. Okay. Ms. Pitko?
So my question has to do with understanding, let's just start with maintenance. Are these numbers for things that we spent for the year, or is this just for the next 4 months? So like if we look at custodial temp service, $1.1 million, is that allocated for the year?
On that particular one, yes, the note for that line is additional cleaning services for the school year.
I know, but I'm trying to understand, like, hand sanitizer, masks. Is that just for the 4 weeks, or is that for the year?
We are just constantly ordering to keep up with supply and keep it in stock. So as to how long that will last, I don't think we know that yet. I don't know that we can gauge that yet, but we are constantly keeping up with demand.
So the number for PPE is going to potentially change. Ms. Jacobson.
So we and the public should view this document as a living document where, I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, we're in a $200,000 greater hole than we were a couple of weeks ago, and that can continue to be the case throughout this entire year. So while the deficit is looking at what it is right now, it could be double that by the end of the year, if not even more so, correct?
This is definitely a work in progress.
Okay, so this will be good information as, you know, the quarterly review on the 15th, and just for everyone to keep in mind that it's going to be updated all the time, right? Okay,
Correct.
Thank you.
Right, and as we mentioned at our last meeting, you know, there'll be new, if we, for some reason, have to go full remote, there might be savings that come from that. So while, you know, the deficit may grow, there might be savings that offset that. So I totally appreciate what you're saying, and you're right, but we need to appreciate that it works both ways based on the model that we're in. Mr. Peterson.
Just to make clear, because of the confusion with Colleen DC coming up and down, with the bus monitors, again, back to the point of this being a living document, right now we have not spent $63,000 on bus monitors. But I imagine we will leave some amount on this line open for flexibility if people are going to be hired, or are we stopping looking for even bus monitors to hire at this point?
We will keep it as an option.
Thank you.
I mean, it does sound like the need is still there, that if all of a sudden, you know, we had people applying to be a bus monitor.
Sure, no, and I completely understand it. I just,
Ms. Mascanelli.
And to the point of bus monitors, since they have to undergo the background check no matter who they are, wouldn't it make sense, since we mentioned it even 2 weeks ago, that idea of parent volunteers for that position, if they'd be willing to do it, no matter what they need the background check, is there any reason not to reach out for something like that now?
We can certainly pursue that.
Any other questions? Okay. Just so the board knows, we had the Board of Finance quarterly review is next week, so we will be meeting with them. I emailed Mr. Brown today, just requesting that the Board of Finance approve fully funding the non-lapsing account to the 2% that is allowable by state statute. Thank you, Ms. Mansell. Adoption of policies. That the Board of Education adopt the following policies. Policy 5141.25, students with healthcare needs, life-threatening allergies, and glycogen storage disease management. Policy C19-08, 5113, students attendance excuses dismissal. Policy 6999, district-provided distance learning during facility closures in response to emergencies. A motion, Mrs. Maxine
Can I
Cannelli.
make a point of order before
Yes.
we carry the motion?
You may.
I would like to request that we split these into individual votes, rather than vote them all as one lump.
Any objection to that? Okay, so then we'll take that off the table. Recommend a motion that the Board of Education adopt policy 5141.25, students with healthcare needs, life-threatening allergies, and glycogen storage disease management. Can I have a motion? Mrs. Maxine-Cannelli, a second for that. I'm breaking them up as by motion. Mr. Peterson, do you want to give a background on this, Mrs. Maxine-Cannelli, this policy? We'll take them one by one.
Yes, thank you. So first, just to be clear that this, as in case you could not tell, this policy preceded the announcement that Mr. Cummings just made regarding these changes in this at the state level, and that in order to make sure all of our students had lunch, especially in that PM cohort, that Mr. Cummings essentially asked the policy committee to give him options. And so these changes that were put in here started with simply that lunches could be had in the classroom. But as this is the policy with the sensitivity towards those students with life-threatening food allergies, we additionally put in the language regarding the prepared in the school. All of which is now moot regarding the elementary schools if we now switch to, on Monday, this notion that they can grab their lunch and go. However, there is additionally, I'll point out to you on page G, the idea that the no eating in the middle schools and high schools, which is something which you would hope would be common sense anyway with COVID, that they should not be removing their masks in the classroom for this eating. And so that is why we put that in there. But so I did not receive any questions on this, so I don't know if there are any now.
Any questions about this policy? Mr. Peterson.
Not a question, since I was on the policy committee and we had these discussions, but to explain a little bit I'm going to vote against this policy. In general, I have been very much in favor of awarding superintendent additional powers and additional flexibility. And we did have a wide-ranging discussion on this. There's one aspect of this policy that I find distasteful. And again, I'm very happy to hear that we're not going to go this way, but the possibility existed in certain scenarios that if a kid did bring home school or home lunch to school, that child might be requested to eat outside the presence of his peers, which made me uncomfortable, which is the reason that I'm going to be voting against this, even though, as we said, hopefully that's not ever going to occur given the updates that we received today.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Mrs. Maxine-Cannelli or Mr. Peterson? Ms. Jacobson?
I just wanted to recognize that we had invited our nurse advisor in to assist us with this policy, because there was a lot of conversation about it and difficulty. So I just wanted to say that what we had before us was something that she did support that we adopt just because of the allergy situation. So just wanted to put that out there, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobson. Ms. Picco?
Now that Mr. Peterson went down this rabbit hole, I have to ask a question. And this may be an answer Mr. Mancusi can give us. Given that we have students that are there all day long in CLC rooms, if they bring their own food, does that mean that they are not eating in the classroom, that they have to now go somewhere else to eat?
I believe, but let me just check the policy. I believe it's a general education classrooms.
Can you please repeat the question?
So students who are there all day long, are they now, if they bring their own lunch, rather than opt to have the school lunch, are they not allowed now to eat with their peers in the classroom? Do they now have to go somewhere else?
No, but the exact lunch protocol for the CLC under current conditions, I'm going to have to get to you.
Ms. Vitale, if I could jump in on that?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Ms.
just to be clear, the idea of, and again, we had a very good discussion. I wasn't, this isn't anything we didn't already have out in policy. But to be clear, the idea is that the cafeteria is being used for lunch. So no one is being isolated in a closet to eat his or her homemade lunch. You'd be going to the cafeteria, but if it was made at home, you would be required to have that in the cafeteria as opposed to having it in the classroom. So that was the idea, and again, Mr. Peterson was not comfortable with that, and we don't have to replay our whole conversation, but I understand where he's coming from. Mrs. Jacobson and I felt differently about this. And I do feel the need to throw out there, just as a reminder to everybody, our focus in putting that language in was on peanut and tree nut allergies. But just as an educational piece, I feel the need to say that there are many other life-threatening food allergies that are still then entering the classroom, whether it is dairy, whether it is wheat, so that by no means, this is an issue, and it's something that I've always been acutely uncomfortable with, having any food whatsoever in the classroom. It was a huge compromise that we finally relented several years ago to having snacks in the elementary school classrooms, because it wasn't feasible to get those snacks in there otherwise. But, even this was very much a compromise. But again, that's how Mrs. Jacobson and I felt.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we'll take it to the board for a vote. All in favor? Mr. Tully, Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Picco, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Vitale, Mr. Asa, Ms. Maxinelli, Ms. Leeper, all opposed? Mr. Peterson, motion carries 8-1. Okay, can I have a motion for policy C19085113, students' attendance excuses dismissal? Ms. Maxinelli, second. Mr. Peterson? Any comments about this one?
I don't want to keep summarizing them. Everybody's obviously read them, but I didn't receive any questions, so I don't know if it was just crystal clear, straightforward again, or if anybody has any questions at this time.
Okay, no questions. I'll take it to the board for a vote. All in favor? Motion carries 9-0. Motion policy 6999, district-provided distance learning during facility closures in response to emergencies. The board did receive this. Ms. Maxinelli, second. Mr. Peterson? Assuming no questions? If
I
anybody
just want to make one brief comment. If you'll notice that this does not have the yellow highlighting on it, because this is not, all of the yellow highlighting in the others, one of the first policies we approved, I don't know, half an hour ago, renders it so that when this emergency is over, all of that yellow highlighted language disappears. That is not the case with the policy in front of you here. The point is we're having distance learning going on and facilities are not closed, and we felt that this needed to be updated to reflect that, so this would be a permanent change in front of you.
Thank you for that clarification. And of course, you had a clarification on the one that I didn't ask you for a clarification on. Any questions? Okay, to the board for a vote. All in favor? Motion carries 9-0. Thank you. Approval of minutes. That the Board of Education approve the following minutes. 8/10/2020, Board of Ed special meeting. 8/11, there's a typo there, 2020, Board of Ed special meeting. 8/25/2020 Board of Ed special and regular minutes. Ms. Jacobson, seconded by Ms. Pitko. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Maxicanelli?
Sorry. On the 8/25 regular meeting minutes, on page 4, now I got to find where it is again, right under the superintendent report, as excited as I was to read this, I knew it was inaccurate. And I did confirm with Mrs. Gerber, who confirmed with Mrs. Brown, who confirmed with Mr. Papageorge, that we do not have batting cages as much as I would like them, so that the third line down, that should have been the dugouts are in progress and should be complete before the season begins. I was really hoping that I had just missed that point and that we were getting batting cages, but. So I'm making the motion to amend. Thank you.
Second, Mr. Issa, any discussion? Okay.
Vote on the motion to
Yep,
amend?
I haven't voted. Getting very parched. Motion to vote on the motion to amend. All in favor? Motion carries 9-0. Back to the motion as amended. Mr. Peterson? Second by Mr. Asa. No, that was, yeah. You threw me there, Jeff. All in favor of the minutes as amended? Motion carries 9-0. Thank you. Superintendent's report, school security update.
Just a couple quick things tonight. First of all, I forgot to mention in the update, one of the things that we're keeping an eye on, as we've discussed during the course of the summer, is the temperature. When I was at Fairfield Ludlow today, Mr. Hatzis and I walked up to the third floor. He's got his temperature gun with him, and it was about 78 degrees outside, and it was 83 in most of the rooms on the third floor, the ones that overlook the tennis courts. So what I am concerned about is the weather tomorrow, but particularly the weather on Thursday, because the heat indexes could be pushing 90 on Thursday. And one of the concerns that's been raised during the course of the summer is the heat index with students who are having to wear masks. So as we've talked about, we may have to be in a situation where we have to consider a school early dismissal on Thursday based on the temperature and the weather. As I talked about this summer, one of the things that if we're going to do something like that, we would want to announce it tomorrow, so that parents are able to make adjustments in their schedules and to get their students and things. So I'm just putting that out there. We would do morning, and then we would go for an early dismissal, and we'll continue to monitor it. I'm going to go back over tomorrow afternoon around 12:30, 1 o'clock with Mr. Hatzis, just to get a sense as we learn this. Get a sense of what that temperature feels like. But just again, based on the forecast, and the district subscribes to a forecasting service that is now including this advice in their daily communications to us, just heat index issues that we need to be aware of. So,
Mr. Peterson?
Just for clarity, how would an early dismissal affect students who are learning remotely, either through the hybrid that day or in the remote learning academy?
it's a weather-related event, so essentially school would be canceled for the afternoon. We would be sending everybody home.
Great, thank you.
Appreciate you asking that, because we had that same question this morning.
Ms.
this
Leeper.
afternoon.
If an early dismissal is triggered because of Ludlow, say, does that trigger an early dismissal for all schools?
It would. I mean, Ludlow is kind of my canary in the coal mine for this, but we have similar issues in other schools. And I think to some degree, the issue at Ludlow is offset by the age of the students. But I'm also being mindful of the health of our staff. And I think this becomes a bigger issue, based on what I've understand at the elementary with the younger students and having to wear the masks and the uncomfortability. So I think it really is an issue that would be pervasive across the district.
I was just thinking about our elementary schools that have full AC.
Ms. Jacobson.
Is there a particular temperature that you're looking at that would trigger such an event?
The, in consultation with our health department, it's really the heat index value of around 90, upper 80s, 90. That's what we're looking at. So, you know, that real feel metric that the weather.
And that says measured indoors, obviously not outdoors.
Well, and that's the thing, you know, we don't have, Mr. Hatzis has a temperature gauge, but we don't have a humidity gauge on that. So it's going to be kind of based on what to your point, what the outside is telling us, or the outside is projected to be. But as I said, today, the metric we were getting was the temperature in the building was about 5 degrees warmer than what was outside at that exact same time.
Any other questions about this? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so on school security, so I just want to follow up on a couple of things. First of all, Ms. Mansell, I don't think mentioned, and if I was out of the room when you did this, I apologize, but you didn't? Okay, no, that's okay. And if I get it wrong, you're going to correct me. We had one incident today with this crossing guard out of place, but it was simply not understanding where they needed to be, and that's been corrected. That was at Stratfield Elementary. But because of the early dismiss or the cohort, we've needed to increase the crossing guard hours. And I believe that we initially had budgeted $10,000, Ms. Mansell? So any additional costs of that, we did not budget. Well, the police department, Fairfield Police Department, is picking up the overages for the school system on this, because we are going to, as I said, we've got now two arrivals, 2 dismissals. We did have extra, I mentioned earlier, we had extra police presence at the schools, and we will have that over the next few days as we get through the traffic and we make continued adjustments for the traffic control at the school sites and arrival and dismissal. And the last thing to talk about tonight is, I know there's been some questions and concerns in the press around the changes in the school safety unit. And I am meeting with, I just wanted to let the board know, I'm going to be meeting with the chief of police on Thursday at 1 o'clock to have a conversation with him, and I'm going to invite him at that point, or I will extend an invitation on Ms. Vitale's behalf to meet with the board at a meeting in a couple weeks to have a conversation about this, and I believe in executive session.
Yes, and just for the public, it will be held in executive session per just the police department's recommendations to us on issues of security. I think it's obvious why those things need to be held in private, just to keep them secure. I would like the chief to come and speak to us. There have been a lot of changes with the new models. I have complete faith in the police department. When I was touring schools today, I saw an officer at every school. It was very reassuring. But I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page with this. Moving forward, we just have a lot of changes, and make sure that we get the police's thinking and make sure that we are up to speed on all of the changes that have been made. The school safety unit was part of the planning for the reopening plan in terms of, well, I won't say, but just know for the public's sake that they have been involved in the process thus far. So we look forward to hearing more about your meeting with the chief, and having meeting with him within the next month or so. Mr. Asa.
Just to bring up, with regards to the SRO program, I think it's just important for the board to pay attention to what's going on at the national level. There's been some talks about changes to the program and funding, and possibly eliminating the SRO program, the federal funding portion of it, for various reasons. So I just, put us all on notice that we should be watching that and seeing what happens. And again, communication with the police department on that.
Ms. Jacobson.
I'm just bringing up a different security matter. I'm curious if at some point, even in that meeting that we might have, or in a subsequent one, given what's happening around just the massive explosion around digital devices and usage by kids in schools, and there's been some security issues around that in our state and around our nation already. So I'm just wondering if we could just get a brief update on where we're at with handling all the increase just maybe from Nancy Burns or just from someone, to make sure that we're adequately secured on that front as well, on the digital front as well as the physical front.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just in terms of security also, just the mental health supports in our school, security, and we could have a large discussion about changes that we can make within our school district to make our community safer. And we'll look forward to having those discussions in the year ahead. Anything else for the superintendent's report, Mike?
That is it.
Any other questions for the superintendent? Okay. Seeing none, committee and liaison reports. Does anybody have anything to share? Ms. Ortelli.
So, plug for special education PTA. Everybody go out and join. You can go to fairfieldsepta.org and follow the links for the membership. They'll be holding their first meeting Wednesday, September 30th at 7:30 p.m. The Zoom link will go out via the SEPTA Star, which is when you join our communication, our weekly communication. We're going to meet and hear from the Fairfield Public Schools Special Education Department coordinators, so they can answer questions and hear parents' concerns and introduce themselves. So everybody join SEPTA. And also, I just want to give some information from the Fairfield Regional Fire School. They'll be holding their Heart Saver CPR for the layperson on September 24th. It's 7 to 10 p.m. for $50. You can learn adult, child, infant CPR and choking. Go to fairfieldfireschool.com to register.
Any other reports? Okay, seeing none. Public comment, once again, for those members of the public, we invite you to make comment via the form on the website or via the public comment email address. And once again, public comment will be posted with the minutes as long as they are on agenda items, and you need to have your name and address, and they need to be verified. I'm sorry, I went out of order. I missed open board comment. So any open board comment? My glasses are fogging and falling off, so Mr. Peterson.
I just want to say it's nice to be back here.
Anybody else? Happy to see you all too, and thank you to our executive directors and those, listening in on the phone, and looking forward to doing it again in a couple weeks. And wishing the second cohort B a great first day in school tomorrow. Ms. Picco?
I just wanted to thank Mr. Peterson for the lovely flowers and for Mrs. Gerber for the treats. It was very nice and welcoming to come back.
Okay, and with that, motion to adjourn. Ms. Jacobson, seconded by Ms. Rotelli, all in favor. Motion carries 9-0.